This podcast was recorded during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Without the labor of the writers and actors currently on strike, the television and movies being covered here would not exist. We stand with the writers and actors and support their call for equitable and fair treatment for everyone in the industry. You can support those on strike by making a donation at entertainmentcommunityfund.org, which will go to a writer, actor, or other entertainment worker in need.
You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to ThunderQuack Perfect 10. I am your host, Michael Cohen, and hey, I know it's been a little bit of a longer break than anticipated. Try and keep to that 4-week schedule, but life got in the way. So, if you're a Patreon subscriber, you know all of the gory details of that. If not, I'm gonna leave it there because it's like a little tease of like, hey, go subscribe on Patreon, and find out what's going on in my day-to-day life. But never mind that right now. We gotta talk about this. We're late. The topical reason to do it has already it's already come and gone. So now we're just playing catch up. And it's just occurring to me that this is only going out to Patreon supporters in the immediate future. So for everybody else listening to this on the regular podcast feed, way in the distant future, the liminal space that is whenever the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes are ended. Sorry for the long delay, but the reality is that we didn't want to put this episode out during the strike to the general audience because this would technically be considered promoting something that would have been struck work. It's a whole complicated thing. It's crazy. The reality is just that the AMPTP and the studios should be paying the WGA and SAG-AFTRA union members appropriately. People should be making a living wage, and they should not be exploiting people and using AI stuff to basically take away people's jobs by stealing their work and their likenesses and that sort of thing. It's a whole complicated thing that, like, hopefully now you're listening to this in the past, but if you're a Patreon supporter, we're in the middle of it. You still get to listen to this episode on time. But future episodes of Perfect 10 will be about things that are not film and TV, meaning that they can come out on time. We're talking about a lot of video games, but and books and stuff like that. But on this episode, we're going to talk about something very, very near and dear to my heart. And to do that, I needed to bring in somebody else who is also a huge fan of this franchise. I always do this where it's like a tease of like what we're talking about on the episode, but it's literally in the title of the episode, and you guys already know that it's Ninja Turtles. But months back, when I was like, oh, I want to talk about the 1990 Ninja Turtles as a Perfect 10, sort of in to coincide with the release of Mutant Mayhem, the new Ninja Turtles movie. I was sort of on the lookout for like, who am I going to do that with? Who am I going to bring on to talk about this? Because usually I go to a friend and say, hey, come be on Perfect 10. What do you want to talk about? And I let them bring it to me. But this was one of those ones where it's like, well, I want to talk about Ninja Turtles. Who am I going to talk about Ninja Turtles with? And trust me, there's no shortage of my friends online, that like podcast friends, that I could talk to about it. But I'll be honest, I didn't want to just like go to another one of my mid to late 30s white cis hetero male friends to talk about Ninja Turtles, because they aren't going to have anything additional to say that I can't already talk about. And that's just going to be two white guys talking about Ninja Turtles, which there are lots of those podcasts. But then one day I randomly saw from another one of my friends an incredible enthusiasm for Ninja Turtles, and I was like, bingo. So that's why I went to Missy, who you guys might remember from our Roman holiday episode a couple months ago, and was like, do you want to come on Perfect 10 and talk about the Ninja Turtles? So and Missy was enthusiastic about it, to say the least. So Missy, welcome back to the show, and I'm excited to talk about Ninja Turtles with you this morning.
Thank
It's
you.
morning for us.
Yeah.
We're record appropriately, actually, for me. Well, I guess it's the afternoon for you, but for me,
Mhm.
I'm recording on a Saturday morning, which is
There you
appropriate for a
go.
Ninja Turtles
Saturday morning
conversation.
cartoons.
Yeah,
Exactly. No, I'm so excited. It's so funny because I would never think of it as something that like I would end up talking about, but once you raised it, I was like, oh my god, I have so much to say. So I'm
that's
very excited. Yeah.
it is a thing that I'm always trying to be conscious of. It's like there are so many. There's the TikTok meme of like the where it'll start and it's like a clip from one of these obnoxious podcasts, and then it cuts and then it's there's like a song is like another white boy with a podcast,
Yeah.
and I'm always like I have to consciously be aware in the space that I'm in. And even though and I've been doing this since 2008, so I feel like I'm like I precede like that movement of like that specific type of podcaster. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? They're talking about crypto and gains and all of these things that very toxic masculine men talk about on the internet. But like I always have to be conscious of like I have an audience, I have a platform, and I know the people that listen. Like I know who that audience is, specifically the Patreon people, and I know that their perspectives and their what they want to talk about is a much more diverse pool of perspectives than just a bunch of generic. I'm gonna use this word, just like the douche bro like kind of perspective, right? So I'm always like, if we're going to talk about something that is yet another very typical podcast topic, especially like for Perfect 10 to talk about the Ninja Turtles, to talk about the 1990 movie, it's like, yeah, I could bring Joe on, I could bring Tim on, I could bring Kyle on, I could bring a million people on that I know are Ninja Turtles fans.
And who are awesome, no shade.
Exactly, but it's the thing of like just us having like an echo chamber conversation of like we have the same story. Like I know that Joe and I have the same story in relation to Ninja Turtles. There's going to be some nuance to it of like, oh, like this is my first memories of it and this is his first memories of it. But for the most part, our experience of Ninja Turtles is exactly the same. I know that for a fact because I've talked to him about Ninja Turtles in the past privately, right? Like off air. Actually, I think probably on Forced Perspectives at some point talking about Boba Fett, we ended up talking about Ninja Turtles. I guarantee it. Just like we end up talking about Ghostbusters or He-Man or any of these other things, right? Like this stuff. It's a period of time. It's impossible to avoid. But then when I saw you talking super enthusiastically about Ninja Turtles, and I think it was specifically you had made a like sort of tweeted something along the line. This was before the decline of Twitter, by the way,
Mhm.
guys. This was months
Yeah.
and months ago.
Yep.
I before you you've basically fully
I
exited.
bailed. I mean, like
Yeah,
I'm keeping my account because I'm scared of what they would do with it if I left it. But yeah, no, I bailed.
yeah.
Like Twitter, rest in
I'm
peace, Twitter.
I'm 5 seconds away from deleting all of my past tweets.
I know.
It's
Ugh.
just the only thing that stops me is like going like there's stuff in there that I actually would like to hold on to,
Mhm.
that I need to like go in and like catalog or screenshot or whatever. But like really great conversations
Yeah.
and stuff with friends. But then I'm also like I'm just being a digital hoarder. I need to just move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No, I get it.
I don't want them using my stuff for nefarious means, which is exactly what
Mhm.
that platform's going to turn into. It's just going to become an AI like source feed
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
all sorts of horrible things that he's going to do with that. But
Yep.
anyways, back to the point is that you had posted something. There was something about Ninja Turtles. I think maybe it was around the time that the first trailer dropped for Mutant Mayhem.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think I think it might have been that, and you had sort of tweeted
yeah.
like, oh, that you had a history with it, and I was like, oh,
Yes.
awesome, because
Mhm.
here's a different perspective. Here's the female perspective, and you always have such great things to say on What the Force about, like fairy tales and sort of that mythic stuff tying into it. And I was like, that's a conversation worth bringing to the internet. Like that's
Well,
one
thanks.
that I can get into.
I'm stoked because it's cool because I don't know for sure because I don't remember it clearly, but I suspect what I was probably referring to when I was talking about that was the oh crud, was it 2008? 2000, it was 2008, I think, was the animated one that came out. There was a
Oh
TV
seven,
anime.
oh seven,
7.
yeah,
Okay, all
yeah.
right. So I knew it
TMNT
was
was oh
in
seven,
that
yeah.
range somewhere. Anyway, and I remember when that one came out and I was, oh, I love it's still one of my favorites. It's so great. But what's interesting is, so I really enjoyed that one. And then you mentioned this one, which my memories were a little fuzzy. Like I had watched it a lot
Mm.
as a kid, but then I hadn't really watched it as an adult. So kind of coming back to it and everything. And it's been really, really fun kind of refreshing all those memories and then obviously getting to see kind of how Turtles has evolved over the years and everything. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm super stoked. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's.
Mhm.
I think we're gonna have a good conversation here. So let's start off as we always do with Perfect 10. Can you explain to the audience for me what in the heck is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle?
Okay, so I'm literally just kind of like pulling this out of what I know of turtles, and
Yeah.
therefore it will not necessarily be historically accurate in terms of, well, the first comic dropped. Well, I don't know what year the first comic dropped. Anyway, so but the point is that Turtles started as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles started as comics, and the four turtles are named after Renaissance masters. So they are Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo, um, uh, Donnie, Raph, Mikey, and Leo. And they are cared for and trained by Splinter, their master, who is a giant rat. And their arch enemy is Shredder. There are others, of course, many, many enemies, but Shredder's kind of the main guy. And then their best buddy, April or O'Neill, who is typically a reporter. And then Casey Jones also sometimes hangs out with the group, and his characterization changes over the years. And all of these characters have evolved over time. So while they have settled into personalities that we would find recognizable at this point and that we'll talk about later, they didn't all start that way. And that's what's kind of
Mhm.
cool about this movie, which is the 1990 film, which is that it was an earlier phase of the development of their personalities, and so it is different from what we see today in more recent um, adaptations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. The Ninja Turtles are, I think, one of the most amazing phenomenons of pop culture in that
Mhm.
they are at once a completely wholly original concept,
Mhm.
and yet they I'll talk a little bit about what, like, where they actually came from,
Yeah.
because I don't think that the majority of the audience that grew up with the Turtles actually knows the full history of it. um but they have managed to adapt to every decade, essentially every
Yeah.
era since their inception,
Yep.
in a way that, like, He-Man has failed to do, the Power
Mhm.
Rangers have failed to do, Pokemon has failed to do, right? Like these other things that were like massive movements at the time, um they end up being fads, right? Like, and yeah, those franchises continue, because everything corporate franchisable gets to continue,
Mhm.
in this, like, uber capitalist society that we're in, that preys on our nostalgia. But the Ninja Turtles, to me, the most interesting aspect of it is that when we actually look at the different iterations of them over time, they um they don't care. They don't
Yeah.
care about what came before, it's not precious.
Yeah.
They've been adapted so many times, and even in that early span, um, this movie that we're going to talk about is actually the third proper adaptation,
Yep.
the third take within like a decade of them
Mhm.
existing, right?
Right.
So I think it's actually in those roots that they were able to just stay malleable, stay adaptive,
Mhm.
and as you use the word evolve, and I think like that's the most important part, is that they have evolved. And so
Yeah.
you get to now, you get to 2007 with TMNT, and it gets to be something completely different. You get to
Mhm.
Rise of the TMNT back a few years ago, which was wildly different from the 2012 series that had preceded it, which was wildly different from the original cartoon
Yeah.
series. And
Yeah.
now, like, we're not going to talk too much about Mutant Mayhem because of the strike and everything, but I'll just say, like, it is yet another completely new adaptation that
Mhm.
takes it in a totally different direction.
Yeah.
um and and I love it because it's every iteration has something to say about these characters. I shouldn't say every iteration. The next mutation, the live action TV series in the 90s, late 90s, didn't have anything new to say. It was just
Mhm.
Power
Mhm.
Rangers is popular. Let's see if we can do a Ninja Turtles Power Rangers thing. And it did not work, and it's awful. And they were like, we added a girl. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't do it right. Um, Anyways, that's all like a whole other, I think like the next mutation is like one of our April Fools
Yeah.
topics, like we did Spider-Man 3, because it is it is the exception that proves the rule, which is that every Ninja Turtles iteration has something worthwhile to bring to the table, except for that one,
Mhm.
unfortunately. I don't know. I guess, Venus is a character, and she is the first female turtle, um, but anyways, it's a whole other thing. Yeah, but let's get into sort of the the nitty gritty of it, and to do that, I actually want to like kind of set the table a little bit and give everybody the context of who the Ninja Turtles were, so that we can talk about the 1990s movie, um, sort of in relation to these two other versions of the Turtles that it's juxtaposed against. So, the comic, when it originally came out by Mirage Comics, Eastman and Laird, indie comic, right? Like
Mhm.
like the definition of an indie comic. I think that
Yep.
when we look at indie comic success, Ninja Turtles is number one on the list,
Yeah.
right? Especially from that time period. And I Eastman and Laird had been working together on other stuff. They were friends. I and they'd had a little bit of sort of like indie success up until that point. And then one day they were just hanging out. I think they were roommates at the time, and they were just hanging out, goofing off, and they came up with this concept of like an anthropomorphic turtle with a bunch of ninja gear on it, and it was like, that's a thing. That's a thing. Like, this is something, and you can go on Google and you can search it, and I'll post it on the Instagram. Um, I But there's an image of the first drawing of a Ninja Turtle, and it is comical to say the least. So it started off as just a gag between two friends, but then um, Frank Miller was like, just I think it was just sort of like towards the end of his Daredevil run,
Mhm.
where he introduced the hand ninja into the whole Daredevil mythology, which is what like defines modern Daredevil stories, right? Like, it really, like, that whole Frank Miller era of Daredevil really redefined that character into what we know him as now. Before that, he was just a blind guy with a devil costume that, you know threw a baton at people, because he was blind, right? Like the character is like most comic book characters. They kind of start in this very modest uh concept, and then writers come and develop and develop and develop, right? But Frank Miller had set this tone that was like, for the time, so absurdly serious that Eastman and Laird looked at it and went like that he's taken ninja, which at the time is like B movie stuff, right? Like these poorly dubbed Japanese and Chinese films, right? that are being brought over to North America, and they're schlocky and terrible
Mhm.
because of the way that they've been adapted and interpreted for the North American audience, and they're considered a joke. And he's taken, like, Frank Miller has taken that and turned it into something like so cool. And then they came along and they were like, but what if we took that and we like pushed it even further, right? And so that's where the Ninja Turtles are born. And that first issue, by the way, that introduces the foot soldiers, the foot ninja, as like a joke, a satire of the Hand from Marvel Comics, um, and the Shredder as like this the most obnoxious '80s comic book supervillain, like ninja supervillain. What if we just put a bunch of katanas on a guy, right? And that's how the Shredder is born. So like the Ninja Turtles, that first issue is a like the whole thing is a joke. It's an SNL skit in a comic book, right? Like it is a long form mad comic. But that first issue like blew up and people loved it and they kept going, and then they introduced the Krang, and they introduced Baxter Stockman and April and all of these other characters. That end up being like the main characters moving forward in the series. But Shredder is that character that sticks around, right? Because he's just such a great concept, and the foot ninja are such a great concept. It's like you got to have
Mhm.
the Ninja Turtles fight other ninjas. um but it always, there are people who take Ninja Turtles so very seriously because it is so near and dear to their heart, and I am one of those people. But I am so deep in the Ninja Turtle lore, not just like the Ninja Turtles, like the in world lore, but like how they were created, who Eastman and Laird were, and the other creators who've come along and sort of like plussed the Ninja Turtles as they've gone on. Um, that like for me, I look at it and I'm like, there are no rules here. This
Mhm.
started as a joke,
Yeah.
right? Like the whole thing exists as a joke.
Mhm.
So everything and anything is fair game. Unlike something like Star Wars that has like this very, I find a very like concrete, solid foundation in those three original films, but in
Mhm.
particular in A New Hope.
Mhm.
Like George had a vision for that world and a purpose for that story, um and a methodology towards telling those stories. And I think that that's all very important.
Mhm.
And it's foundational, right? Like it's a concrete foundation, whereas the Ninja Turtles are built on sand. Like
Mhm.
they are built on a giggle that turned into a comic book, that turned into a cartoon series, that
Mhm.
turned into a movie, that turned into an empire,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
it, like the whole thing is built on such shifting foundations that like every interpretation is valid to me. Like
Well,
that's the difference for me.
yeah. Star Wars is a vehicle for George Lucas's philosophy. Like, I,
Hmm.
I mean, at its most fundamental, that's what it
Yeah,
is. Versus, TMNT it is just a cool, fun concept. Hey,
yeah,
Ninja Turtles, that's fun, right? In the modern day, and they like pizza and all. Like, I mean, it's just fun and
yeah,
silly. But what's great about it is because the characters are teenagers, that's what enables them to plug into the zeitgeist in every
yeah.
era. And so that's what's really cool, and why they're able to keep reinventing themselves is because what they're always doing is speaking to kids, adolescents in this, this phase of change, and interacting with their world, moving into adulthood.
Yeah,
And there's always something new to say about that, because in every era people experience that part of life differently. It looks very different now than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So that's why it's fun, I think, to watch all the different versions of Turtle, or experience all the different versions of Turtles, is because you're seeing what was adolescence like at the time that this was made, because that's what this is
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
Um, I have a story that I want to talk about,
Do it.
but first I'm going to ask you the question.
Oh, okay.
What's your first memory of the Ninja Turtles?
Okay, so it is actually, this movie is my first memory of Turtles.
Okay.
And it's because, and this is what's so funny, when you were like, hey, let's talk about this movie, the 1990 movie, I was like, I only have one memory of that movie. And my only
Mm.
memory of the movie is Casey Jones going, "Oops," as he crushes Shredder. That's the only thing I remember. And what's
That's
funny about that is, in
fantastic.
retrospect, why is that the only thing I remember? I feel like it's because it's framed as a joke, and yet even as like a 4-year-old or whatever I was, I understood the utter horror of a guy being crushed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I remember just like being like, whoa. And so that is one of my earliest memories. And then beyond that, the I was so big into the show when, the early 90s show when it was on.
Yeah.
Like, I just watched it religiously Saturday mornings when I got home from school, whatever, just constantly watched it. And just really, really loved it. I remember tons of that show, like lots of the show. I remember very,
Hmm.
very strongly. And I love the song so much that I got my kids hooked on it very young. I was like, "We're listening to the song," and they're like, "Oh, this one," and I was like, "No, we're listening to the original."
Yeah.
And so I love the song, and yeah, that's definitely my first experience of Turtles.
Awesome.
Mhm.
So I've talked about this on other podcasts. So if you're one of the Patreon supporters that's been listening for a long time, you've probably heard me tell this story multiple times. But this is the first time that it's actually properly in context, because usually it's like part of a tangent. Um, so the Ninja Turtles are actually like my first fully formed memory. Like that's how far back I go with the four brothers. Like they are family to me. Like that's like it's inextricable. I can't get away from it. Um I have memories that are a little bit earlier than the Turtles, but they're like fragmented memories, right? It's like that sort of like I fell off the back of a bed when I was like 2 years old and split the back of my head open. That's my very first, like that's the first thing that I ever remember is like that night, because there's trauma like attached to it. So there's like I have like trauma memories of going to the hospital and stuff like that. But they're like flashes, right?
Mhm.
But my first real memory, this is the furthest back that I can trace, because like having talked to my parents and stuff, it's like this, like I would have been like 4 years old. And it was in a house that I have no other memories of. Like it was like post that like everything else is in like these other houses that so I sort of have like very solid memories moving forward. But it's like this is the only memory that I have of this house. And I remember details about it that like when I talk about it, my mom is always like, I don't know how you were so little. And it's like, but like you can describe that in such detail. And it's, I assume, a Saturday morning. No one else is awake. It is just me and my dad. And like that dawn, like golden hour sort of light, right? Like that early morning, like gold light is coming through the window in the kitchen into our living room. It was like the kitchen was sort of like just off of the living room, which is like a sunken living room, right? Like a couple of steps down. Um, and I remember sitting on my dad's lap with a bowl of cereal, like he and I eating a bowl of cereal together, Fruit Loops. Like I remember the cereal, watching the very first episode of Ninja Turtles, which like I don't know how he knew that it was going to be on, and I can't ask him now cuz he's gone. So like this is one of those things of like I just have to like hold on to this memory. Like this is just like it is not exaggerating, and it's not hyperbole to say that this is the most important formative moment of my entire life, because everything that comes after it is informed by this moment, which is sitting on my dad's lap eating a bowl of cereal watching the first episode of Ninja Turtles. And like that, for that pilot episode, did not it wasn't it wasn't released on VHS with the rest of them. Like it wasn't until much later that you could go back and you could watch the pilot episode. It very rarely aired on TV, right? Like because the rest of the episodes, not the rest of them, but most of them were part of like storylines, right?
Mhm.
But the first episode isn't. like it's sort of its own thing with like the origin story
Mhm.
and all of that stuff. Like the pilot was the pilot, and that's how they used to do things, right?
Mhm.
And so it was one of those things of as early back as I can remember, I know that I had seen the first episode of Ninja Turtles, right? Even though it was very hard to come by. And it wasn't like it is today where you can just go search things up or just buy it online or get a DVD or whatever, right? Like back then it was like if you didn't catch it on TV, there was a good chance you would never see it again. Um, but yeah, like that is the very basis of my entire personality. And I think it's the thing that actually like there's that, and then I think actually like I talked about falling off of that bed and cracking the back of my head open, that early brain trauma, I think, are the two things that differentiate me from my brothers. um because my brothers are both jocks, and my mom, she wouldn't want to hear this, but she was a jock too. She was like a track and field
Mhm.
jock in high school. um and she played softball and like did all of these things that are like so far away from who I am as a person. And my dad also played baseball and like but I'm much more like my dad than I am like my mom. Because my dad was a dancer and an actor, and like he had more of that sort of a thing, which I'm much more in line with that. Which is, it's funny that like it's this memory that is the first layer of my entire personality. Because I often say that like everything, once I realized that like I sort of unlocked that first memory and was like, this is the thing that like I am always trying to get back to. Like it's that
Mhm.
moment in
Mhm.
my life of like just like I think that a lot of people can relate to this, that a lot of the things that become sort of core to your personality are things with loved ones, a parent, a
Yes.
grandparent, a sibling, that it's like I know that exact feeling. I know
Mhm.
that exact feeling of like security, of happiness, of joy. It's like what to me, and I know that a lot of people will relate to this on a very like surface level of like what's better than sitting and watching Saturday morning cartoons and eating a bowl of cereal. But for me, it's like literally nothing is better in life than sitting on a Saturday morning with a bowl of cereal, like cold frosty milk,
Mhm.
sugary cereal, and something bright and ridiculous on your TV in front of you, like
Mhm.
2 inches away from your face, right? Like that to me is everything. So everything that I do, these podcasts, my work, I my relationship with my own kids, my relationship with Crystal, like it is literally all built on this foundation. To the extent that like I'll tell you, the reason why Crystal and I started having conversations is that she said something about He-Man. It's like what I've done to you for this
Yeah.
conversation today.
You're like, "Oh?"
She said something. I met her working at Toys R Us. We were both working at Toys R Us, right?
That is such an awesome nerd origin story. I
Oh,
love it.
it's so good.
Go ahead.
And we were in the break room at one point, and she said something about He-Man and like needing to know more about it, and I was like, "Oh, well, you've come to the right place. Like allow me to absolutely, because of the point in time I didn't realize what I was doing, but allow me to mansplain He-Man to you." And I brought her a VHS because this is how long ago it was, that she could borrow and watch a couple episodes of He-Man, because at the time the YouTube didn't even exist yet.
Yep.
Um, I yeah, and like that was like my in to talking to her, that turned into a relationship that I've now been with her for 18 years,
Mhm.
and married for 13 of those. So I like, and that is because like she said something about a cartoon show that I like.
Yep. Yep.
And I like cartoon shows as an adult because of this core memory that is different from I think the experience that my brothers had growing up, was just
This is so
like
funny.
that one thing. And then like I say, I think that brain trauma, which is why I have ADHD and my brothers don't,
Yeah.
um, which makes me very different from them in a lot of ways.
Okay.
I
I
which I thought was anxiety until I started uncovering this. Like, oh, I don't actually think I have anxiety. This is all just ADHD. It all just
yeah.
points back to ADHD.
Yeah. So
Undiagnosed.
I don't want to take us terribly off topic, but I will say it is uncanny that we have a fair amount in common in a lot of
Mm,
ways.
mhm.
So I was 4 and I fell off the monkey bars onto concrete, busted my head open, and had to go to the ER. So,
And
yep, been there. Yeah.
that's why we've both pursued
See?
professions in the design, because we're just not capable of doing anything else
Yes.
other than
Okay.
being creative and artistic, and this
Yeah.
is the only way to make money at it.
We're just really,
So
really obsessed with pictures, okay? So, like,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
but like, and then I went to college for illustration and animation,
yeah,
and I became the president of the Classical Animation Society at my school, which is where I met my husband.
yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of wild, but yeah. So turtles is a big part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I make the joke that you and I have quantum entangled brain cells,
It's a
right?
little weird, man.
There are things that like you'll say something and I'll like, or you'll tweet it or post it or whatever, and I'll be like, that is exactly how I feel.
Hmm.
And it's just, yeah, there have been way too many coincidences. We are on parallel paths in different parts of the world, but
That's true.
um yeah, it is fantastic.
It's
But
too funny.
that's why I wanted to talk about Ninja Turtles with you, because it's like, if someone's gonna understand me, I know that you'll understand me. Um, so yeah, so Ninja Turtles are not just like, this isn't for real, because if you've listened to me talk about stuff on the internet for any length of time, you know how important Star Wars is to me. You know that Obi-Wan Kenobi is like the moral compass by which I make decisions on a daily basis. But the Ninja Turtles go deeper than that, to the extent that like, it's not conscious, but I will find myself going like, well, that was a very like Ninja Turtles informed decision. Like, that's why you act that way. Like Star Wars, I didn't come to until I was 10, right? Like, I wasn't ready for it. It was when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, right? Like, I thought Star Wars was dumb before that, and then when I was ready to understand it, it all of a sudden it was like the only thing, right? Like, it's just total like narrow focus, to the extent that like everything else fell away for a very long time, including Ninja Turtles. um but there is a component of like, every time they announce something new with the turtles, it's like I am right there.
Yeah.
It's literally the core of everything. So, and this 1990s movie was a huge part of it.
Hmm.
Because obviously, growing up watching the cartoons, that like I had to see this movie the second that it came out. And I couldn't tell you, like, I don't have a memory of seeing it in the theater.
Hmm.
um but I do know that I know from talking with my brothers and with my parents that like I did see it in the theater. We went and saw it in the theater. But I don't remember seeing it in the theater. I just remember this movie. It's a
Hmm.
little bit like Ghostbusters in that respect, where like that's another one where it's like,
Yeah.
I I don't have a first memory of Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters is just there. It's
It's just
just
a
imprinted
no,
on my brain.
exactly,
It's just always been there. And
exactly the
this
same.
this movie is the same thing, right? Because it
Hmm.
came out when I was 5, so it's like, it was just, yeah. But I do remember repeatedly getting it on, like renting it from the video store, because we didn't own it.
I
So
remember
we rented
seeing
it
it
from the
a
video store all
lot
the
at like daycare and after school programs. I
time.
don't know why, but
Yeah,
they put it on like all the time. So I
yeah,
remember
yeah.
frequently seeing it in that context. And then I remember I went through a brief period of time where it was like 3 years where I didn't like turtles because my arch nemesis in elementary school was a big Turtles fan. And so I sort of
Mm.
reacted to that and was like, oh, I can't like what he likes. And then, after and then, well, yeah, first time I ever cursed in my life was when I finally fought back against that kid. He was a bully, and I fought back. And then after that, I decided that he didn't get to have turtles anymore, and I was going to enjoy it in spite of him. So,
That is such an important lesson to learn
mhm.
in life, that like because I think that we have this inclination to define ourselves in opposition to other people.
Yeah.
Because I've done that too, right? Like,
Hmm.
I one of my best friends in my life, I I when I first met him, he was coming. This was in the 11th grade, and he was coming from the junior high into the high school that I was already in, into our theater class, and he was funny, and it made me so mad that he was good at improv because that was my thing.
Mm.
And so like for the first 3 months of knowing him, I like defined myself in opposition to his presence because he was taking my thing from me. And it's like, no, this like I am the theater guy. Like I am the funny improv guy. You aren't taking it. And so like I got like super serious. And then it wasn't until like I don't even remember what happened, but at some point it just clicked and it was like, oh, we get to be funny together. We get to be silly
Oh.
together. And it like, and it turned and it's like, you're now my best friend. Um, but yeah, but so often I think that we will define ourselves in opposition to another person.
Hmm.
And it's like, it's so counterproductive. All you do is cause yourself pain when you do stuff like that. It's like you denied yourself Ninja Turtles,
Yeah. But I mean, like,
right?
to kind of bring
What
this,
a terrible thing to do.
I know, how dare. But no, but like, so to bring this back around to today, and again, I want to be,
Mhm.
cautious, like, you won't be putting this out till later when, in solidarity with the strike. But so when we get to the point of having the conversation, it's like Barbie. The way that people are responding
Yeah.
to Barbie is,
Yeah.
a lot of us avoided it for a long time because it was something that was seen as lesser than
Yeah.
like girly things are lesser than,
Yeah.
right? So a lot
Yeah.
of us would avoid pink, and a lot of us would not, pretend like we didn't like Barbies, or convince ourselves that we didn't like Barbies, and so on and so forth. And it isn't until you reach a level of maturity where you're like, no, actually, I can enjoy what I want. And so, to the extent that that
Yeah.
obviously applies to Turtles, like, to your original point about it, it was a joke originally. It's very silly. The concept is very silly. They are,
Yeah. Yeah.
literally mutant turtles. So it's goofy, but it's really fun, and it's okay to enjoy the things that you enjoy, regardless
Yeah.
of, how you justify it as, with the lore or whatever. It's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to enjoy.
Well, I think and this is the whole point of Perfect 10, right? Is that like this podcast is about celebrating things that we love and defining ourselves in that way, right?
Mhm.
So like a Perfect 10 is not it is not an objective measurement tool. It is a
No.
completely subjective measurement tool. And that's the point of it, is that like this movie is a perfect 10 not because of all of the things that it does right, because it's like because like there are technical things that this movie does wrong, and it is dated, and it is like a relic, right? Like it is
Mhm.
very much all of those things. And even at the time, there are elements of it that it's like, okay, yeah, like this was like a weird indie film basically. um but like a being a perfect 10 is like a transcendent quality in my
Mm.
opinion, not to get like sort of too high on my own podcast and my own definition of things, but like that's why I put a term around it, right? Because there it is an ineffable quality that it's we can't I can't quantify what makes something a perfect 10. That's why we have to talk about it for over an hour, right? Like that's the whole point, is that it requires a podcast to discuss it. Whereas what I found myself doing on ThunderQuack with Amanda a lot of the time, because we would be talking about topical things, is that we would be talking about things that were pissing us off, right? Namely DC movies, right?
It's
Like
okay to vent about those things too, though.
and absolutely it is, right? But it became a thing of like, I think like Perfect 10 exists in in um like juxtaposition, in contrast to the way that I was responding to like the DC movies and to Rise of Skywalker and stuff like that. Or it's like I
Mhm.
was going online and just like adding to the vitriol, which wasn't it's not helping anything, right? Like and that like that thing with Star Wars of like defining my love of Star Wars in opposition to the Rise of Skywalker is not a healthy place to be, right? But instead to talk about the things about Star Wars that I love,
Mhm.
which is the point of forced perspective, which is why I came up with the two podcasts at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Last year.
Mhm.
Sort of which by the way, this episode is the 1 year anniversary of Perfect 10. This is
Aw,
the
happy
yeah,
anniversary.
so I'm terrible at like celebrating those things. It's like we had the 15-year anniversary of Frontlines, and I didn't end up putting out any content for it. But that's kind of also because of the strike and all of that.
For
It
sure.
is a very tough time for me to put out podcasts at the moment. But here we are anyways. But yeah, like so like the whole point of Perfect 10 is to celebrate the things that we love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this movie is like calling this movie a comfort movie is like doing it a disservice. Like this movie can turn around any bad day for me. It's like there are certain moments in it right from the beginning of like wise men say patience is divine but never pay extra for late pizza or whatever,
Oh yeah.
like just stuff like that. The ginsu, not it slices, it dices, and then the pizza lands on Splinter's head, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
gooey cheese on this rat puppet. And I'm just like, there's a moment every time I watch the movie where I see that where I'm like, they had to clean that off,
Yeah.
but it was worth it for the shot because
Mm-hmm.
it sells the moment.
Yeah.
And people will talk about the Ninja Turtles now, especially with Mutant Mayhem out of like, oh, the Ninja Turtles have never sounded like teenagers. And I disagree with
I
that so
disagree I think
vehemently.
they've always sounded like teenagers. I just
Their voice, their
yeah.
voices, and I don't mean like the actual like sound of their voices, although they do have some famous teenagers
Sure.
voicing them in this movie, right? With Corey Feldman as Donatello is like,
Yep.
as in 1990, you're not going to get a more famous teenager than that, right? There's a
Exactly.
handful of actors that fit that description.
Mm-hmm.
So perfect for Donnie, right?
Yep.
But it is that scene early in the movie for me that like we start off with all of the like cool dark ninja stuff, right? We don't see them until we do see them with that killer soundtrack. Oh my god, the soundtrack to this movie is
It's so
everything to
fun.
me.
It's so specific to the time period.
Yeah. And the way that like the logo flies out and then there's the Ninja Turtles and here they are, they're real, right? Like
Yep.
they're real. They're not, I don't care. Like just Jim Henson and the team, they worked miracles, and there's all of this behind the scenes stuff that and we can talk about all of that. Whatever, it doesn't matter. These Ninja Turtles are real.
They look
They
so
are. They are.
cool. Like I've just really okay, so we're gonna talk about things that held up and things that didn't hold up. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
personally, and maybe not everyone will agree, but I personally think that the suits themselves actually really hold up. I think that they look cool, they're fun,
Yep.
like
A
I'm here for
thousand
it.
percent.
Love
A
them.
1000%. There is no, and I am not one of these guys. People who hang around me know I am not one of these guys. I love CG. I love technology.
Mhm.
I love where we've gotten to with digital characters. There is nothing that will ever convince me that you will do a better job of capturing these characters in live action than what they did in this movie.
Mhm.
Like we can't even go back with the technology now
No.
and do what they did then. It's
Right.
like it like you would literally have to just replicate exactly what they did with exactly the tech that they used
Mhm.
in like a in the way that they do period films where it's like that always win Oscars for ridiculous reasons against movies that you're like the costume design and man, what is it? I can't remember. There was a year where like some period movie won over maybe it was a Star Wars movie where I was like, "Are you kidding me? The costume design in the prequels is ridiculous."
Yeah. No,
And
the
yeah, and you're
prequel
like,
costume
but
design did not get the respect it deserved.
yeah,
Yeah.
but then it's like, oh, but they made authentic petticoats in this movie, and it's like, yeah, but that existed,
Yeah, that was
right?
a
But
real
like,
thing though, versus making something that never existed
yeah,
or that was an adaptation. So, no, this is
but like
incredibly cool.
yeah, like in order to recapture what they did in this movie, you would have to go into an archive and look at exactly the limitation that they had at the time
Mhm.
and the way that they had to work around it, and you'd have to rebuild it from there. Because even you get to the next movie where they've got a bigger budget, they have
Right.
more time. Well, actually, not more time. They came out within a year, but like you have more money to do it, and you have all of the lessons learned from the first film,
Mhm.
and those turtles, as great as they look, I think that they look really great. And I think actually the performances are a little bit better in Secret of the Ooze.
Mhm.
But but the realism, they start to hit the uncanny valley a little
It
bit
is.
where it's
And
like,
so one thing I wanted to mention about that I thought worked really well about this and that was one of those things that struck me as like, oh yeah, that was
mm,
really common back then as a a typical filmmaking pattern was you don't see them a lot, like they
Yeah.
they deliberately don't show them often. There's a lot of showing shadows on the wall, or they just kind of are ducking out of frame just at the right moment and everything. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of not showing them to you. Think of it
Yeah.
similar to how like the shark is treated in Jaws. Like you
Yeah.
rarely see it, and the reason you rarely see it is not only does it make it scarier, but also it means that they just didn't have to use the animatronic shark as much.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, so that in Turtles, I thought was very similar in that regard. Is they keep them sort of mysterious a lot by keeping them
Yeah.
hidden. You don't see them as much, but also they have a lot of darkness. I thought it was very interesting to me the way it was a very dark movie in terms of the lighting, and yet I was still able to see everything that was really important. It wasn't like today where they can't light a set to save their lives. So
Yeah. Well,
that's really cool.
that we're in a funny spot right now with digital where
Mhm.
these cameras are capable of doing so much, but then um the way that things get processed and then the way that they get delivered to us, the
Mhm.
compression
Yeah.
on streaming is just like we just completely lose the blacks, right?
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
it just disappears.
Yeah.
But that's like super like tech film nerd stuff that people don't necessarily want to hear all about.
Right, but
But
this was film, it wasn't digital. It's, a
well,
shadow is a
this was
shadow is a
yeah,
shadow. So
this was right at the beginning of the era, and I think that a lot of this is nostalgia for me, but I think that there's also some legitimacy to what I'm about to say, which is that like the early '90s were, I think, the best era for actual film, right? Like
yeah,
because when we get into the 2000s, we start to move towards digital,
right.
and I like this is even sort of like this is early era of like non-linear editing like Avid.
Mhm.
So we're not even like fully into the era of like digitizing film in order to do our editing. This is an independent film. Like Golden Harvest is a studio that did nothing else
Mhm.
of note other than the Ninja Turtles movies, right?
Yeah.
Like this first movie was done on like a shoestring budget and like basically like a hope and a dream and a wish, right? Like that's how the fact that this movie exists in the way that it does is as miraculous as film gets, and any movie existing is a miracle because it is so difficult to make films. But this movie in particular being as good as it is, but like looking as good as it is, I think is in huge part to like the very specific period of time that it was filmed,
Yeah.
and that specific time is that early '90s of like everything just being like perfectly crisp, lighting being very naturalistic. um because when you get into the later '90s and the early 2000s, you get into more like stark contrast lighting, and we start to take on like more of what a modern appearance of a film is now, which is not very realistic. It's
Mhm.
not like people will say like, oh, I want like a realistic movie like The Dark Knight, and it's like The Dark Knight is not
It is
lit
not
in a
realistic.
realistic
Yeah.
fashion,
Yeah.
right? The Dark Knight is lit in a very stylistic,
Yeah.
very heightened way, right? But most people don't really understand film in this way. Like they kind of they get what they get.
Yeah.
But being a somebody with a film degree, like I am,
Mhm.
that nerd, that snob a little bit. But like the '90s, the example that I always go back to for what I'm talking about when I talk about this stuff, it's like there's that sort of um tan taupe color tone to it. Everything kind of has a little bit of like a brownish pinkish hue to it,
Yeah.
and it's the type of film that they were shooting on. It's just the era of like the technology and the type of lighting that everybody was using. But the movie that I always go back to is Father of the Bride, the
Mhm.
Steve Martin movie. It's like it is to me like that. It is exactly right in that era, and you look around and it's like it's like that sort of Southern California, actually it's sort of
Right.
mid California aesthetic to it.
Yep.
This movie has a little bit more grit and grime because it's a New York movie, so it's
Right,
like
which
it's almost got like a little bit of like a French Connection vibe to it,
yeah, yeah, but that's another
from
thing
the
that's
cinematography. But
very of its time in
yeah,
this movie is that anytime you had a depiction of New York City or, in the DC universe, Gotham, which of course is just
Yeah.
like DC New York. Like anytime you had a depiction of, the big city and it needed to be gritty and everything, they always had this same look, and they always made it very dark and forbidding. They always made it, very dangerous at night. This was,
Yeah.
always the way it had. And granted, that was a semi-realistic portrayal at the time because New York City hadn't really been. Eventually, it was cleaned up, like later '90s and everything. It was cleaned up
Yeah.
quite a bit. But during the time that this movie came out, it still would have been a little bit of a
It,
mess.
it's funny
So
because
yeah,
the difference, if you want to put it in film terms, it's like you've got, this is the very end of that era of New York,
right,
right? In
exactly. It would be the
1990.
tail end. Yeah.
Because by the time that Kevin McAllister gets lost in New York in a couple of years,
Yep.
because I think that's 92, right? Like New
Yep.
York is clean. Like
Yes.
it is a place where it's like, yeah, it's a little bit scary to be a 10-year-old or whatever lost in New York, but it's not that bad. Times Square is a tourist attraction, right?
Yeah, well, like
Uh,
compare it to like, Ferris Bueller a couple years later, right? And then everything is, bright and sunny and like,
yeah,
it's totally different. So yeah, for sure. It's just the way that cities were depicted in the
yeah,
late 80s and the very, very early 90s. It was always like this. It was always, you only show it at
yeah.
night and it's always
You,
really
it's
messy,
always wet.
dirty. It's always wet and like,
Always wet.
there's criminals around every corner and everything. And,
Yeah,
and I love that they start off that way because they have that whole voiceover of the
the
newscaster
newscast.
talking
Yeah,
about, like, oh, the crime spree and oh no, what will be done and everything. And it just made me laugh because I was just like, oh my god, this is like this is so specific to 1990.
yeah, yeah.
So
It
yeah,
is. It is.
it's
Well,
great.
and I think like this movie is definitive to that time
Yeah.
period. But I
Mhm.
want to go back to something you were saying. You were talking about the way that they sort of use the shadows to
Yes.
cover up the
Mhm.
turtles and that sort of thing. There are also some tricks of like, because there are different versions of the suits, because there are the
Yes.
ones with the animatronics, which are for the performance scenes,
Right.
right?
Facial
But then
performance.
there are ones that don't have none, and there's no better moment that exemplifies it than on the top of the rooftop, when Raph is fighting all of the foot ninja by
Mhm.
himself, and there's a moment where he's doing a bunch of back handsprings,
Yeah.
and he is moving with such fluidity that it's like the suits were super bulky and super
Yep.
difficult to move in, the animatronic ones especially, because they're hooked into all of these cables, because
Right.
they're being operated by somebody that's actually like 5 feet away, and there's cables like on the floor and stuff like that. But there are a lot of scenes where because like what, like right before that moment with Raph, there's the scene with Mikey and Donnie watching cartoons. He's like, "Ninja kick the damn rabbit," because they're cheering for the tortoise and the tortoise and the hare. It's just,
Mhm.
I love it.
That
These are
is
jokes that I
so
didn't get
funny.
as
I
a
love
kid.
that.
I didn't get it as a kid, but as an adult, I watched the movie and I'm like, yeah, he's like, Mikey's like, just ninja kick the damn rabbit, because their context of a turtle
Right.
is a ninja.
Right.
But then they're watching a cartoon of a turtle and they're like, why is he going so slow? Go faster. They're so frustrated by it because they're like, this is poor representation, you guys. Um, but I most of that scene is shot from behind the turtles,
Yes.
because then they don't have to worry about the lip sync, and then
Yep.
it's just the voice actors just like riffing
Mhm.
and making jokes, right? So there's a lot of this movie that is actually like, that was done in the editing, that was done in ADR after the fact, that sort of like punched it up.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. But I want to talk about the Michelangelo sequence that is removed from the film. That
Oh,
was
yeah.
something that like I just learned on TikTok, like what was that, like a week ago?
Yeah,
Like
I know.
maybe 2
You
weeks
just
ago?
said it. You were like, "What is this?" And I was like, "I've never seen this."
Yeah, yeah, and I sent it to you. I was like, "Oh my god, like I didn't know this." There's a whole plot line with Michelangelo after, like, when they go to
The
the
farmhouse.
the farmhouse, of like all of the turtles sort of dealing with their defeat at the hands of the foot, and at the hands of the foot. Does that sentence work? Anyways, it's impossible to talk about Ninja Turtles in a serious way. It's impossible. You can't do it. Don't even try.
Good luck.
Um, they go to the farmhouse and they're all sort of dealing with it in their own way. And April is literally telling the audience about this. But she doesn't talk about Michelangelo.
Mhm.
Like in the final film, she mentions nothing about it. Like she talks about, oh, Donatello's latched on to Casey, and the two of them are like, he's kind of processing grief because they kind of assuming that maybe Splinter is dead at this point, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so like he's goofing off with Casey, and Leonardo has like taken his role as leader and as like the new patriarch of the family very seriously, and he's meditating and stuff. Raph is just angry and screaming on top of the farmhouse, but it's actually like that's not Raph, it's
Yeah.
actually Michelangelo. You look at it in detail and it's like, nope, that's orange, and it's Mikey, because all of the turtles look different.
Yep.
They all look slightly different, they have different builds, they have very different faces. And when you look at the detail of it, you see like that is absolutely 100% Michelangelo. You can see his nunchuck, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
so it's part of like a storyline that they planted earlier when Mikey and Donnie at the beginning of the movie are waiting for the pizza. Donatello says like, like what Splinter was saying, like he won't always be around, like how do you think you would deal with that? And Mikey just like blows it off, like he's
Yeah.
just like, oh, he's late, that's $3 off. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't even acknowledge what Donatello is saying because he can't, which is like, it's such a mature read on this character, Michelangelo, the party dude, who like isn't really defined but in the comics in that way, but more so in the cartoon series, right? But that's the context that we're going into this movie with, is like, he's the orange headband, he's the party dude, and we're like, we're gonna take it in this way. It kills me that it's not in the movie, because I like it would have elevated the film to this, to even further, because like I think this is the most elevated version of a Ninja Turtle story that we've gotten,
Hmm.
properly executed. I mean, like the IDW comics take it to another level, but that's not mainstream, right? Like that's
Yeah.
very,
Well, I
if you're a Turtles fan, you're reading the IDW comics,
yeah.
but in terms of like mainstream success, like this is the most elevated the story's been,
But I'm
and it would have taken
actually
it even further. But
I'm actually curious though, how would it have influenced the characterization of Mikey if it had stayed
mm,
in? And the reason I say that is because, like, as I mentioned much earlier, the characters definitely evolved over time. Like, one thing I thought interesting, kind of coming back to this movie after having not seen it for so long, and after having watched, again, the 2007 and some of the other adaptations, is that we most of the turtles' personalities are quite recognizable today, right?
yeah,
Especially if you go based off of the song from the the TV show, where it just lays out what kind of all of their thing is, right? And so you have Raph, who he's rude and he has a bad attitude and he's like gruff and everything. And side note, when I was in college, I had a friend who had an absolutely massive crush on Raph. She literally had like an entire like Raph shrine in her room. She had a pair of real size, which were amazing, and all this other stuff. It was so incredibly cool. And I just want to mention that that's like a thing because um it's the cliche of girls love bad boys and Raph is the bad
yeah.
boy. And so I really love that, actually, that
Well, and
that came up.
there's a little bit of because of the nature of them being anthropomorphic turtles. They are
Right.
monsters. They are,
Yes.
it's a there's a little bit of a
Monster
monster bleep,
boyfriend thing going on there.
yeah, sort of
For
thing going
sure.
on there, which I love. I love
Yes.
that. See, this is why I had to have you on the podcast, because if I had talked to Joe about this, or if I had talked to Tim about this, we definitely wouldn't have talked about the fact
Having
that
a big old crush on Raph. Yeah.
some girls wanted to be in romantic relationships with these
Heck
characters.
yeah, absolutely. No, all the time. Like, honestly, like if a group of girls that I knew got to talking about the turtles, at some point the
Yeah,
conversation came up of like who's your favorite turtle, but the unspoken context is who would you would date, right?
yeah,
So like,
yeah,
and obviously not everyone. I'm not. Plenty of people are gay and aren't interested or whatever, or just that's not your thing, and that's totally fine. I'm just saying that's something I definitely heard for sure growing up, and then even into young adulthood. And
yeah.
so anyways, the point is that, like, Raph is like the bad boy, and then to your point, Mikey the party dude,
Hmm.
Leo the leader. I will say I thought very interesting in this movie that Leo's leadership doesn't actually appear until later in the film. Early on, you
Yeah.
see the other characters referencing it, like, "Oh, such a leader, Leah," but then he doesn't really do anything. And then later, he sort of steps into that role, which I found very interesting. And then with Donatello, I actually felt that his personality was completely unrecognizable. I didn't like his normal kind of interest in machines and like
Yeah.
geeky stuff was not really there at all. He was just kind of there, and he didn't. Nothing really stood out about him. So I feel that characterization must have kind of come along much later, probably, frankly, with the the pace of technology in later adaptations. Then it was easier to lean into that with him, I think, because he becomes more of a
Yeah.
hacker in later versions. Um,
It's I think it's easy in the cartoon series because in the
mhm.
cartoon series we have such fantastical elements of like the foot soldiers are robots,
Right.
Krang is from
Mhm.
Dimension X, the Technodrome. And
Exactly.
so then like the party wagon is outfitted with all of this stuff. It's got a laser
Mhm,
gun on
mhm.
it, the toy
Exactly.
at least, right? It's got it like it does all of these things that he builds a blimp, right?
Right. Right.
The turtle blimp is a thing that exists in the cartoons because the toy
Mhm.
existed.
Mhm.
So it's like you get to have that context with the cartoon, but when you keep it more realistic, his his mechanical aptitude
Yeah.
is only shown off in this in with him and Casey working on the truck,
Right, and
right?
even that, like, it's
That's
more
it.
just like 2 guys in a
Yeah.
truck and they're kinda bonding, but there's
Yeah.
no sense of, like, him being the gadget guy, really,
and,
and
and
so
the next movie gets to shine a little bit more.
right.
I think Secret of the Ooze is Donatello's movie. If you can like sort of pick a turtle that gets the focus,
Mhm.
which usually it's Leo and Raph.
Sure.
But Secret of the Ooze, Donatello gets actually. I think Donnie and Mikey get a lot of the focus in Secret of the Ooze because it's very
Mhm.
funny because they had to lean away from the fighting
Mhm,
because of
mhm.
the parent groups at the time, that were like they can't use their weapons. So it's very silly. So there's a lot of jokes. Michelangelo gets to shine, and then Donatello, because of the science stuff, because of the mutagen, and because of TCRI and all of
Right.
that, like he really gets to show off his personality in that one. And I
Mhm.
think that like that's sort of the for me that's the best that Donatello's ever been is in that movie.
Yeah.
um, as much as I really love him in the 2012 series, he's very
Mhm.
good. He's kind of the butt of the joke a lot of the time in that series.
Mhm.
Whereas like he gets to sort of be the star. He's almost like the lead. Although
Yeah,
Raph
that's cool.
Raph gets a lot of focus in Secret of the Ooze as well.
Raph
But
always gets a lot of focus because again, he's the bad boy. It makes him interesting and fun. Like he
yeah, it's
arguably
so easy.
he's one of the because he's the one that gets that, as you mentioned earlier, that first kind of individual fight scene in this movie. So prior to the
Yeah,
rest of them getting one. And so that's really fun. But I think to take it back to sort of Mikey and that deleted scene is that like, his sort of characterization as the party dude who doesn't really display the same strong emotions I think that the other characters do. That really, I think, maybe to some extent solidified after this film. And so it's interesting to me, how would that have been different if he had been shown to
yeah.
have much darker impulses and personality and darker expressions of his feelings? Would that have made him a different character in other adaptations?
It's really interesting because there's a modern comic. I'm actually not a huge fan of it, although I know that a lot of Turtles fans really love it. Called The Last Ronin, which
Yes.
is a future storyline for the Turtles, where and they've done this a couple of times. This is not the first time that they've done it, but this is like a very sort of like definitive take on it because Kevin Eastman is part of it, right? So,
Hmm.
but the storyline is essentially that like in the far flung future of the Turtles, the other three brothers have all died, and Michelangelo is the only one left, and he is unrecognizable as Michelangelo because he's had to take on sort of like
Hmm.
the grief of losing everybody that he cares about, right? Because in
Yeah.
this dystopian future. Where he's the last Ronin. I specifically don't like it because of that tone. And like that's just I don't think that it's bad by any stretch. I understand why people like it. It's just not for me, right? Like that's
Hmm.
one of those things where it's like I think just because of where I am in my life right now, I just don't like those types of stories. Like I'm
Right.
just kind of done with dystopian like everything goes bad. I like we live in a dystopia
That's
right
what I was
now.
gonna say. We live in
I
a dystopia.
really
We don't need
yeah,
it in our entertainment.
I need
Yeah.
hopeful stories about how we can overcome this
Hmm.
garbage situation that we're in right now, not about how it's going to
For
just get
sure.
worse and worse and worse until we're all subjugated by the
Yeah.
1%, right?
But I
Like
want to
it's
kind of,
it's
yeah, but what's interesting about that is, so then you take that back to this movie, and what I found
yeah,
so interesting again watching it is that it's, yes, the turtles are heroes, and it is a story of them, sort of coming into their own, and they have to be separated from the father figure in order to learn what they're
yeah,
capable of and all. So it all is very hero's journey, which is hilarious. Like, we could talk about all of that stuff as well. But the fact that it ends up becoming about this community coming together because they redeem and bring together all of the boys who are being preyed
yeah,
upon. And so what I thought was so interesting about this is the parallels to today, where there's what's being called a crisis of masculinity and everything, and you have adolescent boys being preyed upon by these mostly right-wing actors and everything, and they're asking them to lean into a more aggressive version of masculinity. And that is what Shredder is doing in this
yeah,
movie, is preying upon these boys that
yeah.
need and are looking for direction in their lives, and turning them to violence.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so like there is this undercurrent. It's not specifically talked about, right? Like it's all subtext, but our window into that world is Danny, right?
Danny.
And the thing that's never said is that like Danny has no female figure in his
He
life,
has no mom.
right?
Hmm.
So like the fact that he doesn't have that nurturing feminine energy in his household makes him a target, because
Hmm.
all he has is sort of a very domineering, forceful dad who's trying his best. I
But
don't
he's a
think
good
that
guy.
that
They
yeah,
yeah, they depict
it's
the
just
dad as doing his best. Yeah.
he's overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
Like he's overwhelmed by his son, he's overwhelmed by April, he's just in over his head in general. That's the type
Hmm.
of character that he is. And I relate. But like it puts Danny in a vulnerable position, and the whole point of that character being in the story is that it shows us how the Shredder is taking advantage, right? And it's
Hmm.
like it is like, that is very interesting the way that you put it, of like that he's preying on the on this stuff, that like we're dealing with this right now
Yep.
in a very like subversive, very like undercurrent of society sort of way, that it's like
Hmm.
nobody's overtly doing this, but the Shredder is very overtly doing it in the
Hmm.
story, right? But he's doing it to these teenagers because they are vulnerable. And so he has his whole speech of like honor and like proving yourself is the only way
Yep.
to become a foot ninja, and like that, but if you do, you will be part of our family, right?
Hmm.
Like you'll
Hmm.
belong, you'll like. And
Exactly.
he's just like, he's very literally telling them exactly what they want to hear,
Yep.
because they're these lost boys,
Hmm.
which is like, it's such a problem that we're dealing with right now. But the point of that is that like, this is not a new problem. This has been like really since like the 60s, right?
Hmm.
Like we've been just building and building and building on this toxic masculinity. But the fact that the turtles, man, this is going to tie into Barbie too,
I
is so
know,
funny. The turtles are immune to that, because what do they have? They have brotherhood, they have each other, right? And that's, these boys that are being preyed upon feel like they're alone. They
Yep.
are out of community, like they're outside of society, or at
Hmm.
least they feel that they are, and they feel that they have to go it alone. They feel that their strength, their personal strength, is the only way to win, because that's what the Shredder is telling them, is
Hmm.
that they have to, your individual strength is what's going to earn you a place in this family,
Yeah.
right? Which
Yeah.
is so antithetical to what Splinter tells the turtles, which is that like, one day I'll be gone, and when that happens, you will only have each other,
Yep.
you will only have your brothers, and that's the way that you'll survive. Like
Yeah.
that's the way that you'll get through it, is with each other. And they go to the farmhouse and they separate. But it's
Yes.
not until Leo has the vision, and then he goes, "Guys, Splinter's alive. We have to come back together."
Hmm.
They come back together, and they only together are they able to commune and speak directly to Splinter. And it's very weird in the movie. There's nothing else spiritual in the movie, but it's never ever for a minute bothered me because it is
Oh,
what the movie is about,
but
right?
okay,
Like,
you wanted the mythic stuff. Here's the mythic
yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Because okay, for instance, when they're at the farmhouse, that's what Marie Claire would refer to as in the lap of the goddess. What are they doing?
yeah,
They are in a place of safety and rest, and they are resting on their journey, while sort of the truths that they're starting to learn begin to percolate and
yeah,
everything. And so that's where they are. And what is it? It's her house, right? I think she said it was her father's house or something. And so it's, again, she's the goddess, it's the lap of the goddess. They are there in this, cocoon as they are transforming. They're going from the boys
yeah,
they were before when they were dependent upon Splinter, and they're becoming sort of these young men that they'll learn how to your point, to rely on one another, and not even just rely on one another, but the lesson that both they and Danny learn is that, these aren't just young thugs who need to be taught a lesson. They are, boys who need compassion in order to grow
hmm
into healthy manhood. And so it's just weird to me that it's like a Turtles movie and it shouldn't really be that serious, but it kind of is
but
because
yeah, it's and you could say like people will be like, oh, you're reading too much into this, but
no.
I'm not reading too much into it because it's reinforced in the fight with Shredder, where
Yes.
they're on this rooftop and they each try and take him individually, and he
Hmm.
Shredder, like, one hand defeats them, right? In the
Yes.
same way that Vader just like toys with Luke in Empire Strikes Back,
Hmm.
right? Like, it's exactly the same. He's just like, oh, come on, you guys. But Shredder, even, like, he literally says it. He's like, any like all of you together stood a chance of defeating me,
Hmm.
but one on one, I'll dismantle you, right? Like,
Hmm.
and then they're like, okay, so then we do it together, and then but Splinter shows up and saves the day.
Hmm.
But they do then come together as brothers, and then they're able to hold their own against the Shredder, right?
Hmm.
It's right there. They reinforce it. It's like, we've learned the lesson, but I love it. I love it when we learn a lesson, when we have a hero's journey, and it's like, we even though we've learned the lesson, there's still an element of, like, you have to continually remember the lesson,
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's not a video game. It's not an upgrade that now that you've got it, it's never going away, right?
Right.
Like, this is that thing that with Last Jedi, so many people forget and they don't understand with Luke's journey, is that, like, yeah, he made it there. He did it that one
Hmm.
time. He learned the lesson and he threw his lightsaber down and he said, I won't kill my father.
Yep.
Right. But then he forgot that lesson. We've actually, people complain about Mando. They don't like Luke and Mando. I think that Luke and Mando is actually a really smart characterization, because we see him get further and further away from the Luke that he was in Return of the Jedi, closer towards the Luke that he is in The Last Jedi, where it's like, oh, that's how he made that mistake. He got
Hmm.
way too into his own thing of building the Jedi Order. He believed his own legend. And, like, that's why he's able to then make that mistake again, because he loses the lesson. So the brothers get up there and they're like, oh, we're going to defeat the Shredder. And Raph is like, I can do it. Right. And it's
Hmm.
like, they lose that brotherhood for a second. And then they have to come back and remember, no, we're stronger together.
Hmm.
That's,
Yep.
I'm just Ken and so am I, right? Like,
Yeah.
it has to be that, like unless you're Alan, in which case you're fine, because
Yeah.
you're
I know what you want to say.
you know it.
Yep.
But anyways, I Crystal said to me last night, oh no, it was this morning before we started recording, we were talking, and she was like, she was like, can we do a Barbie episode? And I was like, yeah, Barbie's absolutely a perfect 10.
Oh my
Like,
god.
absolutely, it's a perfect 10.
That'll be
uh
a good time.
it I don't.
Hmm.
I said to her, I was like, "Are you ready to come prepared to that conversation? Because if you're gonna be on Perfect 10, you got to have notes. We're gonna get deep into it. Like, it's not just." And she's like, "No, I just want you to talk about it." And I was like, Don't worry, we will do a Perfect 10 Barbie episode." What I will probably do is I will probably just get you and other women to come on, and I'll just sit. I'll just introduce the episode, and then I'll let you guys talk.
That'll be
I think
so
that's I think
fun.
that's the most appropriate way to do an episode about that film.
You'll just be
Um,
like, "Hey, I'd like to introduce you to Barbie, 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 Barbie," and I'm just Ken.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
I know.
Um, but actually, I had an epiphany the other day that I think I'm more of an Alan than a Ken.
Ah,
But
there you go.
I but we'll save that. we will talk about that on a perfect 10 in the future.
Good.
Back to Ninja Turtles. Yeah,
Mhm.
like this movie, unlike its sequels, which like I love to an equal extent. That's not a joke. Like that's not hyperbole. I love Secret of the Ooze as much as I love this movie, and I love Turtles in Time, Ninja Turtles 3 as much as I love the other two. Like, and I recognize that movie is not as good. I do not care. It doesn't matter to me. I love it equally. It's the same thing that I'll say that I had said about the Phantom Menace in the midst of everybody still hating the prequels. It's like, I don't care. I don't care that it has problems. I don't care that it's slow in the middle. I don't care that you don't like Jar Jar Binks. I love the Phantom Menace.
Mhm.
And you can go ahead and define it as a bad movie. Doesn't matter to me. You can define Ninja Turtles 3 as a bad movie. You are absolutely valid in that stance, in that opinion. It's a totally reasonable, rational, logical place to be with that. I am not logical, reasonable, or rational when it comes to the Ninja Turtles, and they travel back in time and they wear samurai outfits, and that's it. I don't like nothing else I need to like there's a staff and they hold it and then they switch places with a bunch of samurai. And then
Mhm.
those samurai are in the future and like they get to go play arcade games with Casey Jones. Like
Yeah.
it's a perfect movie as far as I'm concerned, but I understand why other people think that it sucks.
Mhm.
Um but I actually think that all of the Ninja Turtle movies are pretty good, at least pretty good. Even yes, even the what is it 2016 Michael Bay movie one,
Oh
Michael Bay
my
produced.
god. I
He
gotta be
didn't
honest,
direct
I
it,
haven't
he
seen
just
that.
produced it.
But
Okay, so the first one, a lot of problems. First and foremost, there's a lot of racism in it because
oh
they were going to
no.
whitewash Shredder
Oh
into, they were
no.
going to turn Oroku Saki into a guy named Eric Sachs.
What?
They do it. He is in the movie. Eric Sachs is in the movie, but then they went back and they reshot and they added, when people found out that this is what they were doing, they added Shredder back into it as a
Okay.
Japanese guy.
Oh my gosh, weird.
But this is the thing, is that there's a bunch of stuff that's actually like a lot closer to the source material that they do with the turtles that really works for me. I don't like that they're big Hulk turtles, right? But the characterizations of the brothers are actually super spot on. They don't get to shine as much in that one as they do in Out of the Shadows, which is the second one of those.
Mm.
Out of the Shadows is actually legitimately the second best Ninja Turtles movie storyline.
What?
From a writing perspective, it is the second best of the films.
Mm.
Casey Jones is not Casey Jones if you just change his name to a different character. And if you just replace him with somebody else, because Stephen Amell just absolutely delivers one of the worst performances on film
Oh
in
no.
that movie. He's so bad. He's so bad. It's like, buddy, you're acting, and we can all tell. Look, Stephen Amell is a person, no thanks. And that is speaking as somebody who has been in the room with him. He was very, very nice to me at a certain point, and then once I was no longer useful to him, I used to be quiet about this, but now I have no problem spilling the tea because of what he did during this strike. And it's like
Mm.
he just what he did is he just turned around and he showed his whole ass to the entire world, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's the guy that I know, that's the guy that I had an experience with, but I had to be quiet because everybody else thought that he was great. So it's like it just sounded petty up until now. It's like, now you guys see this is the
Yeah.
guy. This is
No.
who he actually is.
Breaking your
If it's
silence.
not, if it's not serving him, then he doesn't care.
Mhm.
And that was my experience, is that when he thought that he needed us for something to be on our podcast to increase his profile and be a man of the
Mm.
people, then he was nice to us.
Mm.
And then the second that he had done the podcast, never heard from him again.
So
Never heard
weird.
from him again.
So weird.
So, anyways, but I say all of that to say I think he's great in Arrow. In the first three seasons, first two seasons, and then season 5 of Arrow, he's fantastic.
Mhm.
I think he's a talented actor. He just needs the right role and the right director. But he is awful in Out of the Shadows. But if you just ignore that part of it, the rest of that movie is actually very good.
Mm.
Like it's a like I would say like it's a 4.5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah.
Um, despite them being the ugly turtles, despite all of that stuff.
Yeah.
It's still like that storyline has some real, in the way that this movie does, it has like real pathos
Yeah.
in the journey of the turtles, and like they actually like they start in one place and they end that movie in another place.
Yeah.
And I think actually Mutant Mayhem owes a lot to what that storyline did, of like,
Mm,
because that storyline is very much them, it's out of the shadows, it's them
right.
going from being the ninjas and hiding and nobody knowing that they exist to being like in the public eye,
Right.
um
Yeah.
and being superheroes, right? And Mutant Mayhem does a similar thing but takes it in a different direction, which I'm super excited about.
So I
um
do want to make sure though that kind of
yeah,
listening to you talk about that, I do want to make sure that we cover this movie's portrayal of Casey Jones and April
yeah,
O'Neil, because
yeah.
again, I was coming back to it after so long and after seeing other iterations of those characters, and so just curious on your thoughts of this compared to some of the other ones.
Yeah, I mean, so April, this April, it's funny, she's actually a perfect amalgam of the Mirage Comics April
Hmm.
and the cartoon April,
Yeah, I agree.
because in the comics she's a scientist, she works
Hmm.
for Baxter Stockman, she's part of TGRI,
Hmm.
which then gets turned into TCRI in the movies, but TGRI, which is actually like a front for like the Utroms, which are like Krang is an Utrom, like it's a whole thing in the comics. So she's their avenue into that world, and like the sort of the backdoor into what Baxter Stockman and the Utrom are doing, and where the mutagen came from in the first place and all of that stuff. I And then in this cartoon series they made her a reporter, they turned her into Lois Lane, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
um
Yep.
but the connective thread there is that she's their one human ally, right?
Hmm.
um and so then in the movie she's a reporter, but she takes on much more of the like sort of that um uh older sister mother vibe that she has in the
Hmm.
comics, whereas like in the cartoon she's more contemporary to them, like it's
Yeah.
like everybody kind of just has the same tone in the cartoon.
Yeah.
The cartoon does not take Ninja Turtles seriously at all, that's
No,
the thing, is
it's
that the
not supposed
cartoon
to.
is very ridiculous about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
And so nobody really has an arc until much later in the series, and then they tried to, but it's
Mhm.
too little too late, nobody was watching at that point. They used to have a whole thing where like they mutate again and they turn into like
Mm.
monster turtles, and
Mm, I
it's like
vaguely
a
remember
oh
that. Mhm.
yeah. It sort of tried to get serious for a second but didn't really work.
Mhm.
um but yeah, so Judith Hoag's performance as April in this, I think actually ends up being pretty definitive for the character for future iterations. I
Mhm.
think that like a lot of the versions of April that have come after it owe a lot more to this one, and then the live action portrayal in the next movie,
Yeah.
than to the cartoon. I think that we've gotten so far away from cartoon April,
Yeah.
although there are a bunch of men my age who get very upset every time April is something other than that, because they, in the same way that you talked about your peers being like, well, which one would you date?
Yeah.
um we all just had the one choice because
Right. She's the only
Irma
girl.
wasn't an
Yeah.
option. Irma had glasses
Yeah.
and a turtleneck sweater, so
Oh, poor Irma.
she was not an option.
Yeah.
Although like I'm very much more interested in the Irma type now,
Yeah.
as an adult than I was then.
Yep.
But it's like we all grew up thinking that like that was, I mean, like she was drawn in a very sexually suggestive manner
Yeah,
in
well,
that yellow
she
jumpsuit,
always was.
like
And in this movie, I did find it interesting, like, the number of times the turtles are like, "What a babe," when they see her on
yeah,
TV and stuff like that. So and that's something that's true in every single version of Turtles ever. Even when she does
yeah,
have a more sisterly or motherly role, one or more of the turtles always has a crush on her at some point in the
yeah,
story.
yeah,
And that and frequently that's actually how her relationship with them starts, is that one of them is kind of infatuated with her, and then they go from
yeah,
there. And then obviously as she gets to know them, it does become, I would argue, a more sisterly bond over time.
yeah,
And in this one, to your point, it's a little more motherly, I think, just again because of the fact that this movie for them is a journey through adolescence, and, kind of entering young adulthood, and she's
yeah,
already an adult, and she's, to your point, she's more of a Lois Lane character. She's here to like
yeah.
take down the rich and powerful and everything. That's what she's after. um and so it's really interesting.
one of my favorite gags in the long history of Turtles, and this is one of those ones that's only funny when you have all of the context. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
it's still funny in the 2012 series if you're a kid and you're watching it for the first time. It's your first introduction to the Turtles. But there's a moment in that series where they learn about the mutagen, and they learn that that's like where it came from, and Michelangelo refers to the mutagen as mom. Like, that's like like Splinter is their dad and the mutagen is their
That's
mom,
so
because
funny.
it's what birthed them, right? But like
That's
the
hilarious.
funny thing in like sort of the long history of the Turtles, the context that I put that in is that in that one, April is also a teenager, right? That
Yeah.
was the first one where they went like, April is not an adult. She is the same age as the Turtles.
Mhm.
Like, that was the big change in that one,
Right.
to that character. And so it's like in that one, it was the first time that this joke ever comes up of like the mutagen is mom, because it was the first time that they didn't have a surrogate mother in the story, right?
So
Like, it's the first
interesting.
time in the context that like
Mhm.
that she never plays that role. She is actually, like, Donatello's in love with her throughout the entire series, right?
Yeah.
So like it was very much that, and then Rise took that, and like she is very much a contemporary of them in that, and she becomes a bit of a ninja herself. And then in Mutant Mayhem, like they've continued on with that,
Mhm.
and also in diversifying the cast by having her be a black girl instead of
Yeah. Mhm.
yet another white character,
Yeah.
for pop culture. So yeah, but it is, you when we talk about it and then you put that in context, I think it's a really like, it makes that gag in that series even funnier,
Yeah, that
of
definitely works.
like they have no surrogate mom in that story, so then like Michelangelo attaches to the first thing that he can think of as a mother, which is a canister of ooze.
Yeah.
um
Right.
yeah, an empty
So
canister, like they literally like it's because Splinter still has the empty canister, and like
oh,
he
yeah, yeah.
literally like reveres it. Like, it's the 2012 series is fantastic. There's some really good writing in that,
That's so
but
funny. But yeah, that's
yeah,
wild. But like and then okay, so then to kind of go from the treatment of April to the treatment of
yeah,
Casey Jones, I'm going to say something that might hurt your soul a little bit. I found
okay,
myself not liking Casey at all in this movie coming back to like he
yeah,
has a couple moments where I'm like, okay, like this is kind of charming. But for the most part, I just found him such a obnoxious example of like the misogyny that was really really common
yeah,
in this era, and it annoyed the crap out of me, like especially like the scene that really pissed me off was when like he's trying to give her a shoulder massage and she's like no thanks, and he shoves her down into the
yeah,
chair and then
yeah,
puts his hand way too far down her chest to be kosher. I was just like, what is happening here? And it just
yeah,
that
yeah,
did not like that's similar to like remember how like in was it Blade Runner, I think that technically uh Harrison Ford's character's behavior is like very basically assault, like very
yeah,
similar, where like Casey Jones is basically kind of assaulting April, and that's not cool. So I didn't like that very much, but
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a historical context sort of piece, right? Where it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, in today's sensibility, the things that he does are constituted as over the line,
Yeah,
right?
very much.
But I do think that the way that she reacts to him tells you that the characterization was meant to be. There's an element of like April is very clearly a workaholic.
Yes.
Her home is not a home,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's she hasn't been taking care of it. She's been neglecting the
Mhm.
antique store, she's been neglecting the farmhouse, she's been neglecting everything but her job.
Yep.
And Casey is this character who comes in, who, like, Casey, for all intents and purposes, appears to be homeless
Yeah.
in this story, right? Like, he seems to not have a place to live. um which I think is a valid read of the character, but maybe also like
Mhm.
that's a little bit, it might just there's just no context.
Mhm.
But his, I think he is meant to be a character that is, and the appeal for her is that he is there to break her out of that
Yes.
and remind her that there's more to life than the story,
I
right?
think that's totally fair. I think that's totally fair.
And so
Mhm.
that moment when he's like she's refusing the shoulder rub starts as like a, hey, you need to take a second,
Yeah,
like
you
you
need to
need to take a
relax.
break.
Yeah.
You're working, like, you've turned this experience, which is supposed to, as you say, they're in the lap of the goddess, there's he's representing that for her, of like, we are meant to be recovering from what
Yes.
happened, and you're choosing to turn it into another job.
Yep. Yep.
So sit down and relax for a second,
Yeah.
right? He does absolutely then go too far with it, right? But like
Yeah.
I think that he's like that forcefulness is meant to be like a thing of like he's trying to shake her out of that mentality. But because he is a man and she is a woman, there's extra context there of like you are asserting dominance,
Right.
and so it's not cool. It's not cool,
No, and
right? We know that now, but at the time,
sure.
I think it was chivalrous, right? Like I think like that it was, but Casey is always meant to be, because he's a vigilante and because he's an outcast, he's an outsider.
Mhm.
His version of chivalry is different. It's
Right.
not like he is a Ronin. He is a
Mhm.
knight with no kingdom.
Yep.
He has no lord. So by design, he chooses to have no lord. No one tells Casey Jones what to do,
Mhm.
right? Not even the turtles. Nobody tells Casey Jones what to do, right? And that's so like he's supposed to sort of be this kind of I don't know, like this icon of freedom, right?
Yeah.
Like he's a very libertarian
Yeah.
sort of ideology, right? But not in a bad way. I don't know. There's a
Well,
little bit
and
of
in
it,
this and
like
in this movie, it's interesting because similar to, again, as we'd already talked about with the turtles and Danny and all the boys who have been victimized by the foot and everything, like they're all on this journey of growth. Like Casey is too, and in particular,
yeah,
part of the way that he grows as a character is by, again, trying to protect and defend these boys who, he
yeah,
is older than them, and so he, has the opportunity to sort of rescue them and obviously rescue Splinter and everything. And so this is how he sort of matures into adulthood. And then to your point, like trying to get April to see beyond just the job and everything, and just her own kind of, life and her own needs, seeing outside of that. So I can definitely see that. And then with regard to the two of them and their relationship, while I don't love it for the aforementioned reasons, I will say one thing I did really like, again, given the era, was at the end when April tells her boss exactly how much money she wants to make. She wants a corner
yeah,
office with windows and all this other stuff. And then as she's getting ready to go on the air, she walks up to Casey and she's like, "So you gonna kiss me or not?" And so I love that she just immediately becomes this like
yeah,
incredibly, I mean, she's been a powerful woman the whole movie, but at the end she just owns everything. It's like,
yeah,
and I get my job and my money and my office, and like, and now I got this like hot guy that's really into me. And so like, I like that for her,
yeah,
that she gets to
yeah.
kind of just have everything she
I
wants.
there is very much an element at the end of the movie, and it kills me that he's not in the next one. He doesn't come back until the third one, and
Yeah.
he's used in a very different way in the third one. And April, like they're not in scenes together,
Right.
so like we don't get to see more of that, right?
Hmm.
But that at the end of the movie, he is very much arm candy for her, right?
Oh God,
Like
he's
you say,
absolutely like
like
trophy boyfriend.
yeah, yeah, she's just like because he's still trying to do the playful banter thing of the like, hey, like, is this are we gonna do this or not? And she's just like, would you just shut up and kiss me? Like
Exactly.
I
Yes.
like if I didn't want you around, I would tell you,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Like I have allowed you to think that you're in charge up until this point, but let me be super clear now, who is wearing the pants in this
I
relationship,
love it.
which is a very like early 90s way to go about it, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, it works for me. And I again, so much of the Ninja Turtles, I'll tell you, it just informs who I am as a person. And that moment right there, until this moment right now, I don't think that I ever put together that like, yeah, that's something that definitely informed my relationship with women. Um, is that, like I can relate on a lot of levels to Casey, the type of women that I find appealing,
Hmm.
I are very much have that same drive that April has.
Nice. Very cool.
So so funny.
Awesome.
I always look back at this stuff that from my childhood and I go,
You're
we
like,
don't really free will is an illusion, right? Everybody's like, I made decisions. Like, you didn't make decisions. A movie that you saw when you were 5 years old
Made
made that
decisions
decision.
for you, exactly.
Yeah, we are just a collection of memories and neurons attached to those memories that fire off whether we want them to or not.
Does
um
fiction affect reality? Well,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. But anyways, I that's a whole other topic.
Right.
We do have to bring up the one other aspect of Casey Jones
Oh,
in
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
movie we can't get away from, which is that, like, he is very homophobic.
Oh my god, yeah. Comes up a couple
To
times
the
in the movie.
extent one of the best jokes in the movie is a homophobic joke, but I think that it, at the time, it wasn't with this lens, but in 2023 I can watch it with this lens that Donatello, like, listen, this version of Donatello in particular, I do not think is necessarily a heterosexual interpretation of Donatello. I would I would put a queer filter onto that character in
Mhm,
2023 and look at him that way.
mhm.
um Especially with Corey Feldman's performance. Like, I just think that I do think that it's there. I think there's an undercurrent of it there.
Yep.
But and his connection with Casey, I think, is part of that.
Mhm.
I think that Casey's response is something that helps me read into this interpretation of Donatello as this character. And I'm going to be clear, queer, not gay. I'm not saying that this interpretation of Donatello is gay. I think that he also thinks that he says in the movie that April is a babe, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
I just think that this Donatello is a little bit more enlightened and doesn't care. He's not going to put labels on it.
Yep.
But there's a joke where Casey is afraid to stay in the sewer, and he's like, "You're a claustrophobic." And Casey turns around and goes like, "Oh, you want me to punch you? I've never even looked at another guy." Because he's calling him, he's call Casey thinks he's calling him homophobic, and
Mhm.
Casey's interpreting that as having a problem with gay people, or like that he himself might be gay in some way,
Right.
and therefore is responding in a way that would make Donatello think. Like, there's so many layers to that joke that it's really hard to read it
Mhm.
on face value. But in 1990 it was absolutely a homophobic joke, right?
Mhm.
It was like, but it's also like Casey is also responding that, like, he thinks that Donatello said the word homophobic, and he responds negatively to it, but then also reaffirms, I'm definitely not gay, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, his read as an outsider in New York City in 1990 is like, hey man, whatever floats your boat, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's the first layer of it. But I'm not gay,
Yeah.
I'm a man, right? Like,
Mhm.
so it's an it's an enlightened 1990s homophobic response, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it's like it is, and at the same time, sometimes it feels like we just haven't come that far. Like, I don't
Hmm,
know, this
hmm.
might seem like a segue, but like it's
Totally.
no, it's related. But are you if you're familiar with the musical Dear Evan Hansen, there's a joke in it that like it probably aged more poorly and more quickly than any other I can think of in recent, where like a joke was made and within a year everyone was like, actually that's a really homophobic joke and that's not okay.
Hmm.
But there's a part in the song where they talk about how these two boys, the main characters, talk about how they're really really close, but then they go, but not because we're gay, no, not because we're gay, we're close but not that way, the only guy that I love is my dad. And anyway, so this, and it's supposed to be this really funny thing, but in reality, you're just like,
Yeah,
wait, what? What? Did they just like
yeah, what does that
protest
mean?
way too
Yeah.
much in order to actually, which got even weirder when, of course, then the star of that show came out. And so then it was like, so wait, now he's playing a character that is homophobic, even though he himself is gay. Like, what? So
Yeah.
anyway, all of that to say that, like, that was only a few years ago, like, probably immediately
Yeah.
pre-pandemic,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
and they were still making basically that same joke that they made in 1990,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is wild.
No.
So it's a shame, but like I agree. It's like it's weird because it is funny and also kind of uncomfortable because you get what's going on around it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, like, the joke is that Casey is stupid,
But the
right?
joke
Like,
is that
that's
Casey is stupid because he doesn't know the difference between claustrophobic and homophobic, and that's why it's
yeah, he
funny.
just
Yeah.
he hears the word phobic and thinks homo
Yeah.
and then is like, I'm not a homo, right?
Yeah, he
That's
completely
his
misses the
thing.
whole point. Yeah.
And it all happens in a split second, and
Yeah.
that's what makes it funny, and especially because it's coming from Donatello.
Right.
To me, like that's he's the one to deliver that joke. He's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, you're a claustrophobic," because he's the smart one, so he's going
Mhm.
to use a word that's way over
Right,
Casey's
right,
head.
right. Exactly.
Even though we've seen in this movie that he and Casey have the best relationship
They
at
do.
this point, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's one of those ones that's like, oh, this has aged poorly, but like I still laugh at it every time
Mhm.
because I'm only human, and Casey being dumb is funny. It's just like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's like I laugh in spite of the homophobia,
Mhm.
um, which I think is fine. This is one of those things. We talk about this so often when we talk about things that are very old. Like Shakespeare is a really great example of something that we go like, oh well, we have to put it in historical context. But then like things that are only a few decades old, we go like, well, we should have known better. And it's
Yeah.
like, but we didn't. But we absolutely didn't know better at the time. And I don't think that like there's a contingent of terminally online individuals that would then say that this movie should all be thrown out because
Yeah.
there's a homophobic joke in it, right? And to me, it's like, no, like let's have a conversation about it. It's fine. It's fine for something to exist within context.
Mhm.
It's like I can't remember if it's an Animaniacs or Tiny Toons joke of like them going back and like fixing all of the old, or maybe it's a Simpsons joke. I think it's a Simpsons joke, where like they go back and like they're fixing all of these old movies, and it's Casablanca, and like they replace a cigar or whatever with a carrot, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, and Marge is like, oh, that's much more wholesome. It's like because we
Yeah.
can't have smoking in movies anymore,
Yeah.
and it's like let the past be the past. It's okay that we sucked at
I
a
wonder
certain
if that
point
was
in
the
history.
reaction
As long
to ET, because remember how, like, ET, they went and put walkie-talkies instead of guns, and it was like, "What?"
this this joke is like and now like that confirms for me that it is the Simpsons, is because the point in time that it is the joke
Yeah.
is very prescient because it precedes that choice,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because
Mhm.
that happened like when like the later 90s or early 2000s. Like I can't remember when they did that,
Yeah.
but yeah, they replace all the guns with
It's
walkie
so
talkies. Yeah,
stupid.
yeah, because it's
Yeah.
like because you can't have the government pointing guns at a bunch of teenagers,
Mhm.
children. Yeah, um, yeah. To me, it's like I as a film nerd, film historian, film buff, a film snob. I am very much of the opinion that we preserve things and then we discuss them, right?
Mhm.
Like there's problematic stuff in everything. There are things in movies that we're making now, like to your point about Dear Evan Hansen. It's like that is not that old,
Nope.
and it has problematic stuff in it that like at the time everybody is going to laugh at, but then within a year or two everybody is like
Yeah, it's
right.
not
And
really
it's like
okay. Yeah.
the Spider-Man video game that came out a few years ago is a fantastic video game. I think it's one of the best games ever made,
Mhm.
but it is very difficult to go back and play it because there are multiple storylines in it because the game came out in 2018, I think.
Mhm.
There are multiple storylines in it where Spider-Man is not just assisting the cops but like doing work for them.
Yep.
One of the way mechanics in that game is that like in order to open up the map as mechanically in a game, you have to have a reason, right? Like
Mhm.
with this big map, it's an open world game. We got to open up all these checkpoints on the map and get all of the little dots so that I know all of the things that I have to go do. And the way that you do that is that the police have a bunch of scanning towers that they are using to surveil New York City, to
Oh,
surveil
no.
Manhattan. And you as Spider-Man are like, I can bring those back online. I'll just use my spider gadget and help the cops. And
Mhm.
it's like, well, in the context of the video game, Spider-Man is like, I'm gonna use this to hook into their police scanners so that I know
Yeah.
when things are happening, so that I can like show up and save the day when there's a car chase, right?
Mhm.
Which as Spider-Man, totally legitimate thing for him to do as a superhero in New York City, right?
Yep.
But in our context in the year 2023 or even a couple of years after that, like start like really actually in 2017, 2018, 2019,
Yeah.
um, we start to get this context of like, Well, that's not what those cops are going to use that for. Those
Yeah.
cops are absolutely going to use that in order to like confirm their own suspicions, which are racially motivated
Mhm.
and leading to way more black guys ending up in prison than anybody else, right? Like now we have had that conversation, and so now I play that video game and like every time I'm helping the cops in that video game, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
Spider-Man shouldn't be doing this,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Like Spider-Man's an everyman hero. He really should be standing up against the cops,
Yeah.
not working alongside them.
Yeah.
And then yeah, like so I don't know. The Spider-Verse stories I think are getting a little bit more along those lines.
Mhm.
I and they're gonna play with that a little bit, but
Yeah.
I but yeah, like it's but does that mean that I now throw out that video game as one of the best video games ever made? No, I can't, right? We have to
Mhm.
put things in context, even things as recent as 1990, and then go like, can we live with this?
Mhm.
There are definitely things that cross the line, right? Like, and then there are people that cross the line. So it's like I can never watch a Woody Allen film
Oh,
ever
I
again.
know.
It's tough. It's
It's
tough
tough.
because
It
Woody
sucks.
Allen is a very, very talented filmmaker, but an absolute garbage human being. I
Yeah.
also have a really hard time watching the first two Avengers movies now, knowing that Joss Whedon is
I know.
complete and utter
Oh,
trash.
no, again, not to get totally off topic, but you know the one that
Yeah.
really gets me that just really hurts. You wanna talk about formative experiences as a
Yeah.
child. When I was a kid, we had, the old analog turntable record player, and we played Bill Cosby comedy records all the
Uh,
time. And I remember like we would laugh and laugh. We would beg my dad to put them on. Please put them
yeah.
on. We just
Yeah.
laughed so hard. And I just they're such a huge part of my childhood and arguably like the formation of my sense of humor. And I
Yep.
can't listen to them now because Bill Cosby is
Yep.
also a horrible person. And I'm like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Stop ruining
Yeah.
things for me.
But it's like but that's why I don't you say off topic. I don't think we're off topic.
Yeah.
This is the reason why we do the podcast,
Mhm.
right? This is the sort of stuff that comes out of it. Talking about Ninja Turtles, and now we're talking about like art versus the artist, and it's like
Mhm.
it's just where the conversation goes. But yeah, like there is absolutely a conversation to be had that we have to have, which is that it does not matter that Bill Cosby objectively is one of the best comedians
Yep.
to have ever stood on stage and done the job.
Mhm.
Absolutely, unequivocally, objectively.
Mhm.
But it does not change the fact that he is a criminal and
Mhm.
a monster.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff, especially the Cosby Show, which I think can be sort of viewed in isolation,
Yeah.
right? Like as long as you have the context and you can be like, well, he used that power to do horrible things,
Yeah.
right? He used that, but he also used it to bust open the doors and change the way that society saw black people,
Mhm.
right? Like that we have to have the conversation about both things being true
Yeah, exactly.
because we you cannot throw away history. It exists,
Mhm.
right? That's exactly like because we talk about that in the negative context of like people wanting to act like America has always just been great,
Yeah.
right? Or
Mhm.
Canada. You know what? It's even worse here because Canadians have a better reputation than Americans globally,
Mhm.
right? So as Canadians, we have this reputation as being polite and wonderful human beings, and we're just all I've never met a Canadian I didn't like. Well, Canadians, as you like think of them in a monolith sort of I sort of generalization, you're thinking of a white person when I say that, right? When I say about the oh sorry
Mhm.
Canadian, you're
Yeah.
thinking about a white person, which does not represent our country at all.
Mhm.
I like this is a very diverse country. I mean, like we have the same issue that America has, which is that you fly over the middle of this country and it is predominantly white. But this country, just like America, is built on the back of genocide, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And we try and erase that, and we talk about Canadian historical figures as heroes, and they're not. They were absolute monsters that enacted genocide and did horrible things in the name of their version of patriotism and in the name of colonialism, right?
Mhm.
Like so we have to have conversations about that. We have to have conversations about this art that is formative, that yeah, absolutely did positive things. And I think in the long tail of history, it it Bill Cosby's effect on society, it outweighs the things that he did personally,
Right.
right? So in the long run, it doesn't take away. That doesn't mean that I go like forgive him for what he did.
Yeah,
Absolutely
no,
not.
of
Throw
course.
him like lock him up, throw away the key. Let's never talk about him in a positive light ever again. But let's talk about the piece of art that he created,
Right.
which is the Cosby Show, that did have a positive effect on society
Yeah.
and did change the course of you know
TV. Yeah.
of history and TV, especially
Mhm.
for Black people, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But at the same time that we talk about it, then we have to go like, by the way. So we talk about this movie, and then we have to go, by the way, as much as it does right, there's a homophobic joke in it,
Yeah, it's
right?
like
Like,
there's a homophobic joke in it. There are cliches,
mhm,
about Japanese and Asian people in it. There are,
yep,
even the way that that crime is depicted. You'll notice that crime is extremely white in this movie,
yep,
because like again, like they're trying to create. I don't know how to explain it. Create the world that they thought their audience imagined, right?
yeah,
Not the reality. Because, like, what are they going to do? They're going to redeem all these boys. Are they going to redeem all those boys if there are a lot of lost Black boys? Maybe not in
yeah,
1990. So this is
yeah,
the point: is that like you know it's a fun movie and we can absolutely enjoy it. And like I showed it to my kids and all that other kind of stuff. And then you also got to have a conversation about these things, and you have to consider that for some people there are aspects of the film that will be a bridge too far. And if for
yeah,
them that taints it to
totally.
the point where they can't enjoy it, that's okay. So, like, again, to go back to like feeling like Casey is really kind of like skirting the line of assault there, like for some people,
Yeah.
that's going to be more than they want to, see in their
Yes.
entertainment. And they're going to be like, nope, I don't need this one. This one can go in the bin. And so, that's why I like talking about this kind of stuff is that to your point, it's like, you're really talking about it as a piece in time, how you've reacted to it over the years,
Yeah.
and what you've learned since then, all that kind of stuff. So it's really cool. I think you get a lot out of these conversations. And again, what I found most extraordinary watching this film again after having not seen it for so long was the way that it just that whole conversation about masculinity and young men
Mhm.
was so modern.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's a lot to enjoy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I You know what? We are approaching the 2-hour mark. I
Mhm.
think we did it. I
Oh
think
yeah.
we did it. I think we've successfully talked about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from the 1990s. We've talked about the Ninja Turtles in general, and we turned it into an important conversation about important things, which is always the goal, always the aim. I Let's talk about something silly and get to a place where we can make ourselves better as a result. That's what, like, this is the thing. That's what makes it a perfect 10. That is
Mhm.
what makes it a perfect 10 for me, is that like yeah, it's a silly movie about a bunch of anthropomorphic turtles. I've been drawing Ninja Turtles recently. I'm
Nice.
in the process of a piece that I've been posting sort of like peaks of on social media, and
Mhm.
I'm on Blue Sky now, and Blue Sky. I really like this as a platform that, like, when you upload images, it's like, hey, don't forget to add your alt text, right?
Yes,
Which is
very
super
good.
important. And so I'm having to add alt text, and the purpose of alt text on an image is to describe what is depicted in the image for someone who can't see it, right? And the act of writing a description for an illustration of a Ninja Turtle is just absurd, because every like I've made a joke of it, that I hope that if anybody is looking at my art on Blue Sky and reading the alt text, like somebody who cannot visually see the art is wants to enjoy my stuff, is reading these, I hope that they get that there's a gag in them that I put in there, which is that every one of them starts with anthropomorphic turtle, comma, and then the name of it. So
Yeah.
it's like, because it's like, how do I explain to someone who's never seen what a Ninja Turtle is? that a Ninja Turtle is a half human, half turtle, named Leonardo, right?
Mhm.
Like I find that so absurd just on the face of it,
Mhm.
that to have to describe what is a Ninja Turtle. It's an anthropomorphic turtle.
Yeah, and you might
Um,
find that your use of alt text changes over time as well, because you'll find
yeah,
different schools of thought about, how much description people want. Do they want, like, to your point, like getting really specific and giving all this
yeah,
description and explaining it as though someone's never seen it? Or do you want, something short and to the point, assuming that, that they've seen some of these things before, maybe, or at least have context
yeah,
for them,
yeah,
and they want to be able to get through very quickly, and not have it be really long. So it's really interesting. I definitely recommend that people, there is a setting in Blue Sky where you can actually require alt text on all your images. So I do recommend turning it on, because it
mm,
will, encourage you, obviously, to put it in there,
gonna force
and to
you
get,
into that.
yeah,
Yeah,
and to get practice with, how to do it. And you'll see more feedback over time about how people like to use alt text, and then you can improve it. So
yeah,
yeah, definitely, it's really good.
yeah. It's one of those things for me where it's like, because the purpose of me posting my pictures, like my illustrations online, is for people to look at them, enjoy them, and like usually I'd like to put a little bit of humor into my art, right?
Hmm.
Because they're cartoons. So it's like, I have to approach the alt text and go like, well, I want to give the same experience to
Hmm.
a visually impaired person that I'm giving to somebody who can see this, which is that like these are like they are cute, silly drawings
Yep.
of the turtles, like out of ninja context. Like
Yep.
that's like my thing with them, is that like they don't have their weapons. And this was sort of off of Mutant Mayhem, right? Is that like I wanted to just sort of depict them as boys,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, yeah, like Leonardo, I have him like daydreaming. When I'm done, it'll be he's daydreaming about April,
No, of
right?
course he is.
I but like he's daydreaming, so like that's my description of it, is that he is it, the description I think is something like anthropomorphic turtle Leonardo with his hands behind his head, daydreaming, well, like with a distant look, daydreaming or something like that,
Yeah.
because that's the point of of this drawing, is that I want you to like get a vibe from him, right?
Yeah.
So but if it were like a picture of my food, I would probably be like, this is a plate of this,
Yep.
right? Like
Yep.
be more succinct of like, yeah, this is
Hmm.
not that important,
Yeah.
right? It's just I just the text underneath, like my whatever the tweet or the Blue Sky post is like, this was a really good meal, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like that's the context. The picture is just a picture of what it was.
Nice.
Um, but yeah, but when it comes to my drawings, I think that I will probably end up being very silly and verbose about
Yeah,
them,
might as
because
well.
it's like, because I want that visually impaired person to have an equal fun experience of my drawings
Hmm.
that everybody else, I hope, is having. I don't know with my drawings. That's the thing about art, is that like sometimes you're like, I think I'm getting my vibe across, and people are like, these versions of the turtles are super rad, and it's like, that's not. I mean, like, I guess they are, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
want
yeah.
them to be like, I'm really trying to make them wholesome.
Yeah.
I want them to just like feel like wholesome good boys.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, but also
go.
rad is always a positive term for turtles, let's be honest here.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
So, yes.
Um, so yeah, so go follow me on social media, guys, because that's the only way that I can get validation for doing these things, is if you guys are liking my post. Man, oh, this whole thing with Twitter, just to close it out,
Oh,
this whole thing with Twitter, he's just absolutely destroyed that ecosystem. And now I post, and like nobody sees it,
yeah.
and I get no validation, I get no engagement, I get no interaction from my
Mhm.
friends. And then my rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is a part of ADHD that I was not aware of, but then it's like you put a definition on it, it's like, oh, that's what's happening in my brain.
Mhm.
It just goes into overdrive of like, nobody likes me anymore, and it's
Oh.
like, that's no, that's not it. It's like, you just like, there's an algorithm, and the algorithm doesn't like
Yeah.
what you're doing, because it's not hate posting.
Yeah.
So it's like, like it just like he really just, he's messing with things that he does not understand, and really really making the world a worse place, which is the
Yes.
opposite of what we try and do with this stuff. It's like, I
Yeah.
want the world to be a better place. I want to make podcasts to make the world a better place, and I want to talk about movies that I think make the world a better place, I I I am firmly of the opinion that this movie, Ninja Turtles from 1990, it objectively makes the world a better place
I think it
for
is worth.
existing.
I think it is worth watching if you've not seen
Yeah,
it, or if it's been a long time since you've seen it. I do think it is worth watching.
go
It
back.
is.
Yeah,
It's a fun time.
yeah, yeah, and then watch Secret of the Ooze, and then watch Turtles 3,
Hmm.
and just watch them and try and have fun.
Yeah, and
Try
if you're
and
really
be
feeling it, like watch the other versions too, because there's so many good ones.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I said that earlier, right? I don't think that there's a bad version of the Ninja Turtles, with the
Yeah.
exception of the next mutation, which is just because it's poorly written. I think
Yeah.
everybody was trying really hard. The suits are really impressive. The
Hmm.
suits are really impressive. Um, but even here's the real kicker. I'm gonna send everybody on a wild goose chase, especially hopefully this is resolved before the strike is resolved before Christmas, and everybody can hear this podcast in advance of Christmas, and then like keep this tucked away for when you start to see Christmas stuff way too early and you get mad about it. And you're like, oh, Christmas, and then it starts to like that whole thing like ruins your Christmas spirit. Go online. Yeah, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. But try and find the whole thing. Try and find the complete thing. Well, we wish you a turtle Christmas. It is. I At the time they had done, this was like post the movies, like post Secret of the Ooze, they did a stadium tour called Turtles Coming Out of Their Shells.
I
That was
remember
like
that.
it was like a rock show where the
I remember
turtles
that.
were singing songs, and it's awful. It's
Oh my
absolutely awful.
god. Yeah.
But it's fantastic because it's so 90s, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's like Next Mutation is just bad. Coming Out of Their Shells is like good bad. Like it's so bad that it's just fantastic. And the Turtles Christmas special, where it's Christmas Eve and they've forgotten to get a present for Splinter,
Oh my
and so
gosh.
they gotta go find a present for Splinter. And along the way they gotta do the rap, which is a rap about wrapping Christmas presents. And they have to sing some
Oh
songs
my
about Christmas
gosh.
and about finding presents and about pizza. And it's just it is the best thing ever. That and the He-Man Christmas special, in which Skeletor is affected by the spirit of Christmas and becomes a good guy for a day. And it's just it, like these are my go-tos, like that, and Rudolph the Red-Nosed
I
Reindeer. It's
hope
like
you
I
know I'm
have to
gonna go
watch all three
find
of those
these the
every year.
second that we get off. I'm absolutely gonna go look these up
It is
immediately.
it is so good that it doesn't matter that it's August right now. If you're
No.
listening to this when this releases, it doesn't matter. You can still enjoy this. But I implore everybody to make this a part of their Christmas traditions, because it's a part of my Christmas tradition. And I have it burned on a DVD somewhere. That's how important it is to me. Is that like I found it and I was like, I need to make sure that I have this. If the internet is destroyed, I still have a copy of this for myself, along with my VHS of the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Nice.
Which, yeah,
Nice.
thankfully the best part of that is preserved online. Well, I mean, like Disney Plus, who knows, they could take it away any second, those monsters. But the faithful Wookiee is on Disney Plus. So,
Nice.
but don't go watch it right now. Don't wait until the strike is over, because like don't give them any extra
Yeah, for
right
sure.
now. Those
Mhm.
jerks. It's bad enough that we're gonna have to watch Ahsoka.
Yeah, speak for
Anyways.
yourself. I'm gonna pass. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah. Well, that's fair. That's fair. Cool. That's it. That's an episode. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you so much, Missy, for taking your Saturday afternoon
Mhm.
and talking about Ninja Turtles at great length with me.
Mhm. Thank you
Um,
for the
I
invitation. This was unexpected but fun. So,
Awesome.
mhm.
Awesome. I'm glad. I'm glad. Awesome. The next episode of Perfect 10 is actually going to be something new. I would love it if everybody listening to this, that especially like, because this will be all the Patreon people, if you guys could go to the Discord. You have a special area in the Discord, but I'm gonna, which is for members only. But I'm gonna create a thread, I think, under Perfect 10 on the Discord for this movie specifically. And what I want is, after you guys have listened to the podcast, which that's why we're talking about it at the end, is to I want to hear what you guys have to say about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1990. I want to know, like, what are your memories of it? But like, really importantly, I want to know, like, what's everybody's first memory of the Ninja Turtles? If you have a story to tell, to go to the Discord and drop that in there, and then I'm gonna do an episode in 2 weeks where I read that listener feedback and like read your guys' part of it, which is going to be a new thing for us that we haven't done before. So I'm going to do that. Also, if you listen to the latest episode of Off the Record, you know that where I'm getting the idea from. I've just started listening in the last month to How Did This Get Made, and when they do their episode, then they do another episode follow up, which is called Last Looks. For them, I'll come up with a funny title for ours, for Perfect 10, for what it is, for your guys' feedback. But if we got anything wrong, or like if there are corrections to the things that we said, because undoubtedly a lot of this is us going off of memory, and sort of I memory is faulty, right? We are not hard drives. So if there was anything that we said in this episode that was incorrect, or that you think needs more context, then also drop that in there so that I can talk about that. And you can also just drop trivia about the movie or whatever about the topic in there. So that'll be the next episode on the Perfect 10 feed that you guys will get on Patreon, but that will eventually go up on the public feed one day. And then after that, the next new topic that we're going to do is something that will actually be able to go out on the public feed, which is Joe and I are going to talk about Final Fantasy 16. So look forward to that, which will be the fastest Perfect 10 turnaround, I think, because that game like just came out earlier, like just a couple months ago. And but Joe and I played it and were like blown away with how good it was, because it wasn't really neither one of us were expecting it to be as good as it was. But we've got a lot to talk about, and Perfect 10 is the best place to do that. So we were going to, and especially right now with the strike going on, it's the best time to do it, because we can actually talk about video games. We're not breaking any rules. We're still showing solidarity with the unions by talking about it. So yeah, we'll have that. And then I'm going to tease you guys. Amanda, my co-host from Quiver and the ThunderQuack podcast, is going to be on Perfect 10. Probably. So the way that it'll break down is that there will be 2 episodes in October. I really hope that the strike is resolved before the second episode in October, because Missy, you and I have already talked about what that is meant to be, and I want to be able
Yes,
to release that.
that would be great.
It will go out for Patreon no matter what, because we are doing this. We're going to talk about this show,
Yes.
but the first episode in September is going to be a Perfect 10 with Amanda, which those of you who've been following since Quiver, I think that you'll be excited to have Amanda come back to a podcast for her and I to talk about something. And I don't know what that is yet. We haven't discussed what it's going to be, but she's been reading a lot of books and she's got stuff that she wants to talk about. So it's that. It might be that. It might end up being New Adventures of Superman, or not New Adventures of Superman. My Adventures with Superman, because that's animation. We can talk about animation, because that is also not part of the strike. So um, we'll see how things play out in the next little bit. I really selfishly want them to just resolve this strike so that I can go back to not worrying about podcasts. But until then, Patreon's the only place to get this specific content. So I hope that the Patreon listeners appreciate that we're still providing for them in the midst of all of this. But yeah, if you do want to support the unions that are on strike, and as well as other people that are affected by it, entertainmentcommunityfund.org is a really great place to go and make a donation. It's a fund that is specifically for people that are affected by the work stoppage, so not just those specific unions, but also the other unions that are affected because they can't work because there are no productions right now to work on. Yeah, because there's a lot of people. These strikes are not about the movie stars; they're about everyday people like you and me that just happen to work in film, and need those jobs to make a living, and right now can't. So I implore everybody to go and make donations to that. And there are actually like a whole bunch of foundations. And if you go to the union websites, especially like SAG-AFTRA has a lot of resources that you can go to and you can look at and make those donations. Which is like, even if you're listening to this after the strike is over, you can still make a donation, and retroactively you are, there will be another strike in the future. It happens. And there's other reasons why people would go to those funds. But yeah, I don't think that even if these strikes get resolved, there are other strikes looming in the future. So this AI and technology stuff isn't going away. So everybody's going to get their turn to fight against it. Hopefully the studios learn their lessons sooner rather than later. But anyways, that is it for this episode. Once again, Missy, thank you for being on the show. If people want to keep up with you, what is the best way to do that right now?
For now, I really recommend finding me on Tumblr. I am on Blue Sky, but TBD what's going on over there. So
Yeah.
Tumblr, I am All Girls Are Princesses.
Excellent. I definitely do that. Missy has amazingly intelligent things to say about all sorts of topics. And you're one of my favorite people to follow online. So
thank you. You're very kind. Sometimes it's intelligent and sometimes it's just squealing because, I think both are valid.
Yep, absolutely.
So,
we
yeah.
contain multitudes.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Missy, for being on the show. And we will see you guys on the next episode. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is hosted by me, Michael Cohn. Follow us on Twitter at ThunderQuackPod, on Instagram at ThunderQuackPodcast, on Facebook at ThunderQuack, and join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the podcast by heading to patreon.com/ThunderQuack to get early access, bonus episodes, and the ThunderQuack Perfect 10 pop quiz. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.